last night. About, I don't know, 20 years ago I stood here presenting to this group nervously, and then we won. I suspect David Osborne is the only one that was. Were you on the committee then? Did you vote for me? That tells you how much the last 20 years later what you said here today may not be remembered, but it will be today. We've gone through a pretty rigorous process, as you know, going from over 500 applicants to the 11 of you today. You're all winners. 2 of you will receive $100,000 awards, and 9 will receive $10,000 awards, and judges will meet. As you know, we have 2 awards. We have an award in each of 2 different categories, and you're going to be presenting them jointly to the group that's here today. About over 20 years ago, the Ford Foundation endowed this program for the purposes of shining a bright light on quality public service, both to appreciate those of you who do the service and to remind the public that there are innovative, hardworking professional civil servants across the country that do the tough work that makes democracy successful. So thanks for being here, and let me turn you and the program. We have very tight time limits with the group in the front will flash very obnoxious signs to you when you get down to 5 and 3 minutes, 5, 3, 1 minute. And we appreciate if you'd kind of conclude on time. And let me turn you over to the chairperson of the National Selection Committee, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. Kathleen.
Hey, good morning, or good afternoon. It was wonderful to meet. Thank you, Steve. Steve does a terrific job, and it's just such a pleasure to work with him and with his fabulous staff. Caitlin, thank you so much for your great work. Last night I was able, as each of us, to meet many of you and to talk with you and to hear about your extraordinarily devotion to public service and to hear about your programs. And it was really, as I went to bed, I thought, oh my gosh, how could we possibly decide which of you should win? It was going to be really difficult. And this morning, we heard from each of the people who visited your programs, and it was just inspiring to hear from each of them the work you put into it, the difference that you're making, and how each of your programs should be replicated across the country. It was really, really fabulous to hear. So we'd love to hear long reports from each of you, but we can't. That's the problem. So we are going to ask Juan Cristomoto. Can you stand up? I know I didn't pronounce your name correctly, but Juan is going to keep timing on your discussions. You're going to have 5 minutes to make your presentation, and followed by us asking questions for 10 minutes. And so will you keep to your 5 minutes, and then we'll try to keep to our 10 minutes. All very, very difficult to do. I really appreciate it. Now each of us are going to go around and tell you a little bit about each of us. We'll start with David Osborne, who has been a judge I think, for every moment of this program. He knows so much about government, and we're really, really lucky to be able to rely on his judgment.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm David Osborne. I'm the author of a number of books about public sector governance, one of which you might have heard of, Reinventing Government, which is
Pretend that you have.
25 years old. And I'm also a fellow at the Progressive Policy Institute in Washington, D.C.
It's a terrific institute.
Who's next?
Pete Peterson, Dean of Pepperdine School of Public Policy, also a senior fellow there of the Davenport Institute for Public Engagement.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Gibbs. I'm a principal at Bloomberg Associates, which is a nonprofit consulting group that works with mayors, and a former deputy mayor of Health and Human Services for New York City, and a former applicant to this award program.
And the Bloomberg government won about award every single year.
My name's Skip Stitt. I'm a former deputy mayor and chief operating officer for the city of Indianapolis, working with Mayor Steve Goldsmith for a number of years, and have been involved judging this program for the last several years. So it's good to be back again this year. Thank you.
It's good to have you back, Skip. Okay, with that, let's begin. First, we'll welcome David Gustafson and Fiona McTavish to the podium from the Mobile Health for Alcohol Addiction from the University of Wisconsin. Thank you so much for coming.
We want to stop people from relapsing to drug and alcohol abuse, and we did that with a smartphone app we called HS. When you were in grade school, I'm sure your teacher probably asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm also sure nobody raised their hand and said, I want to be an addict. And yet, substance abuse disorders are at epidemic levels. In 2015, over 33,000 people died from opioids, nearly half of those deaths from prescription drugs. 23 million Americans need substance abuse treatment, yet only about 10% receive it. Unlike other chronic diseases, aftercare appointments and ongoing monitoring are not standard in the addiction field, even though most research indicates that long-term participation is associated with better outcomes. The addiction field, though made up of caring and passionate people, is characterized by high staff burnout and little success. With these issues on our mind, we convened a group of addicts, family members, and experts outside the addiction field and gave them one task. Imagine everyone working in the addiction field passed away. You must develop a treatment system that functions mainly through technology. We came away with a vision for a smartphone app for substance use disorders. Smartphones were generally not available back then. With grant funding from SAMHSA, we developed HS and tested it in a randomized trial. Using the phone's GPS, HS vibrates if I enter a high-risk zone, such as the bar I frequented. I check it and see, hey Fiona, is this a good place for you to be? Someone else may see a video of their 4-year-old son saying, Daddy, I love you. What appears is tailored to the individual, reminding them of their motivation and disrupting that urge to use. There are 15 services in HS, but the discussion board is the heart of the system. It's where participants can anonymously give and receive support from others. Janice posted this at 4:41 a.m. Once again, I wanted to pick up crack. The name alone speaks for itself. Broken, garbage, destroyed. I want to be whole, not garbage. I feel confused sometimes. Thanks for listening. I needed to share. I didn't pick up. Immediately, she received numerous messages of support. HS has a panic button that I can press if I'm struggling. I answer a couple of questions and am given several options. It may be to reach out to others. I can instantly send a text to my supportive friends that I programmed into HS that says, Fiona's struggling right now, please reach out to her. If I prefer, I can edit that and then send it. While waiting for a response, HS directs me to materials such as guided relaxation, games, or personal stories I can listen to of how others dealt with urges and helping me move beyond mine. We conducted a randomized trial with 349 people. Participants randomized to the experimental group had HS for 8 months. The control group had treatment as usual. Our results? HS reported 57% fewer risky drinking days and 30% improvement in complete abstinence. HS has been used by drug courts, which found a reduction in positive drug screens in high versus low HS users. Staff reported that HS became an extension of their team, created stronger ties, and improved treatment engagement. In a treatment center in Appalachia, treatment retention rates were more than doubled for opioid-addicted young women using HS versus the control group. In a VA pilot study of 47 alcoholics who were referred to as frequent flyers because of their heavy use of the VA health services, received HS plus meds. This study showed an 80% reduction in hospital admissions from the previous 18 months. HS is used by over 6,000 people in treatment agencies nationwide, as well as in Canada and New Zealand, and we continue to grow. We currently have 4 additional clinical trials using versions of HS. We continue to improve HS. One way is by predicting relapse. In real time, HS uses machine learning to analyze discussion group posts and use those results to predict and, most importantly, intervene to prevent a relapse. I'll end with one last discussion post from Joel. He wrote, "I just want to thank you. At first, I was just interested in the phone. I've been an addict for 42 years with no more than 1 week clean at any time. I don't do well in groups, so I tried HS. December 4th will make 18 months clean. So again, thanks. Thanks for this opportunity."
Thank you so much for that really inspiring story. Do you have any questions?
Well, there's one question we're all dying to know the answer to. One of the criteria for this award is replicability. And we were told by the site visitor that no one else can access your application right now. It's only for research groups. So we're scratching our heads and wondering, well, when will it be available to others, and how could it be replicated, and when?
Actually, we probably didn't do a good job of answering her question. The University of Wisconsin and the research that we do is a research activity, but the university did license the product to an organization that is now marketing it. And in fact, they're the group that is primarily responsible for the 6,000 people who are using it now.
Can you tell us, is it a nonprofit, a for-profit?
It's a for-profit.
Okay.
Yeah, I should say it's a Type B organization, which means that the board doesn't have a need to maximize profit. It can use other criteria for its success.
So it is now on the marketplace?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
On the marketplace as an app or to be used with a specific phone?
The only way in which the system is currently available is through addiction treatment agencies. And so an agency can take it and provide it to their customers.
As an application to
As
those
an
customers?
application.
Okay.
So
the phone is no longer always necessary then?
yeah, the phone continues to be necessary, always will be,
But
because
to be provided by?
yeah,
Right.
You can download the app onto your own personal smartphone.
yes,
Through the treatment agency?
through the treatment agency. We do that to protect the confidentiality of the people. We don't want it to get out and be used inappropriately, and so it has to be vetted by somebody.
And could you give us some examples of the treatment organizations that have started to use it?
Sure. S-Star, which is a very large treatment agency in Fall River, Massachusetts, is using the system. They have about 900 methadone patients a day that they treat, as well as patients that are on Vivitrol and other kinds of medication. There's in Cape Cod, Gosnold is a treatment agency that is using it. Kentucky River Community Care is another one. Optum, which is a health insurer, is pilot testing it. Tufts Health System is pilot testing it. So, the organizations, is that enough, or I can go on if you want?
Maybe, and underneath my question perhaps is, I'm wondering, you really impressed me with the potential for low-cost replicability
Right.
and wide dissemination.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about how having this private Type B organization be the marketer, whether or not that's going to disrupt that low-cost feature.
I think because it's a Type B organization, price is always going to be a very low amount of money. I really can't tell you exactly what the cost is, but I think it runs something in the vicinity of $8 a day, $8 a year for access to the system per patient. And so I think it's,
I call that low cost.
we understand that this is a population in desperate need, and the agencies themselves are anything but rich. And so the idea is to disseminate it widely, first and foremost.
One thing that your write-up said was that participants in the various interventions that you've tested use the discussion groups more than any other service.
Correct.
And I wasn't clear, is that sit down with a group, discussion groups, or is that on the phone? How does that work?
Yeah, the way it's first, there are two kinds of ways they can use it. One is they can use it as a personal message to one individual or a couple of specific individuals within the group. We call that private messaging. The second way is to the large group. The way in which it's done is you just either dictate or write messages on the phone, and then it gets sent out like you would if you were texting or doing things of that type.
Yes,
Question.
go ahead.
Yeah, as it's being used, you'd mentioned, Fiona, that you're moving to a place through the technology where you can begin to predict relapse. As this is being more frequently used through these drug treatment centers, how is that information about what you're learning about the usage of the application coming back to you and refining what you're doing there?
Do you want to get that? Or?
Yeah, actually, you hit on, I think, an exciting point, because right now we have over 4 million data points that have come from the use of the system that comes back to the university, and we're able to use those data in a variety of ways to better understand what the relationship between various things and addiction. For instance, one of the biggest predictors of relapse is whether the number of swear words that a person uses increases over time. And that explains, for those of us who are statisticians, which I'm not, explains about 44% of the variance, which is a humongous predictive capability on that one item alone. And that came from the analysis of those data. So then what we do is we look for swear words.
Right. Thank you.
I think the write-up said there were something like 100 other apps out on the market.
I think that's a big underestimate.
Pardon me?
It's a big underestimate.
Yeah, but
Thousands, probably.
does that, how is that going to affect the replication, the use of yours? Is there so much noise out there from other apps that are inferior to yours that you worry about that?
I think that any time that there is apps out there that, I'm not worried about the good competition. I'm worried about the apps that really aren't any good. The more we can get good apps out there, I don't care whose it is, it's important to get it out to the people. One way in which we tend to differentiate ourselves is because of the research that's behind this. You know, we have a lot of randomized trials. Nobody else has done that. That can provide evidence of the impact of the thing, and I think really that's a major differentiator.
And I would say one other thing is, honestly, if we help other apps to become good apps, we're just helping more people. So.
Great. I guess the question is, now if we give you the award, it's really helping a private company in a sense. So it's which is different than, usually we give an award to, you know, a government
Yeah.
agency that does something. And so this is something we've never confronted
Sure.
before that I know of.
Well, the award wouldn't go to the company. You know, what it would do is go back to the University of Wisconsin to continue our research in addiction-related work. And so I think there's a big differentiation. There's a pretty good firewall that's been created between the university and the marketing organization. But, you know, if you want to get something out there and you would get it widely disseminated.
No, I understand. It's not your issue, it's our
Yeah,
issue, I
yeah.
think, at the moment. And look, I think when we read about it, we were thrilled to hear what you've been able to accomplish. I mean, it's really groundbreaking and fabulous
Cool.
what you've been able to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay. So our next, we get to hear from the Voting Systems Assessment Project from Los Angeles. Thank you. We're going to hear from Dean Logan and Monica Flores.
Good afternoon. I'm Dean Logan, Registrar Recorder County Clerk for Los Angeles County, and I'm joined today by Monica Flores, our Administrative Project Manager for the Voting Systems Assessment Project. First, we want to thank the Ash Center and the Kennedy School for the recognition and the opportunity to present our work and to congratulate all the other projects promoting innovation and engagement. It's truly an honor to be part of this program. In Los Angeles County and in local jurisdictions throughout the country, we are conducting elections using aging voting equipment and an outdated service delivery model that has become costly and overly dependent on a very limited and proprietary market. Our 5.2 million voters deserve a system built with a new perspective that looks beyond technology to engage citizens in the process of voting. More than at any time in our history, the integrity of elections and the public's confidence in voting are paramount in ensuring the continuity of our representative form of government. After more than a decade of regulatory gridlock and a dependency on a shrinking commercial market, we knew modernizing voting in the largest county in the country would be challenging. It was clear to us that given the size and diversity of Los Angeles County, there was a need for innovation and leadership. To meet that challenge head-on, we launched the Voting Systems Assessment Project. In an unprecedented commitment to user engagement, creative design, and collaboration, we cut through the layers of complexity and false starts that had previously paralyzed modernization in voting and made the experience of the voter our focal point.
Our vision is to ensure the new voting experience meets the needs of the county's diverse electorate, which includes serving voters who originated in over 180 countries, providing language support in more than 12 languages, and deploying services in an area that spans more than 4,000 square miles. To do so, we engage the county's voters through surveys, focus groups, interviews, and community discussions. We then brought voters together for hands-on user testing and prototyping, where we presented various concepts and designs and incorporated feedback to modify and refine the systems and legal framework needed to support the new voter experience. In total, we've engaged more than 3,800 voters. Voters like retired Postmaster Ernie, who after losing his vision had stopped voting but regained his confidence in helping us identify system features that would allow voters like him to vote privately and independently. And U.S. Army veteran Mike, who felt pride in giving input for a revolutionary system that would allow fellow disabled veterans to participate in the democratic process while overcoming his anxiety of being in a crowded public space. And first-generation American Sue, who votes in every election but worries about accessibility for an aging population and the complexities involved in casting a ballot. We heard countless stories that inspired us. And in the process, we learned the importance on focusing on the fine details that have the most impact on how voters feel about their experience. Through this human-centered, transparent process, we brought the needs and expectations of current and future Los Angeles County voters to the forefront. With the help of a dynamic and diverse advisory committee comprised of community experts and leaders, and a technical team of nationally recognized experts in information security, voting technology, and usability, the project has been able to stay true to a set of guiding principles that governed us from the beginning.
The results of the project include systems that leverage modern technology and an open source platform that provides for a publicly owned voting system. We created a design that is agile and adaptable and that meets the needs and values of usability and accessibility without compromising the importance of security and accountability. This work is both transformational and transferable. What we learned and created exceeded our expectations. We learned that usability is more than just compliance, and achieving access for those with disabilities and language needs results in a better experience for everyone. We learned that in serving a population of millions, we can still focus on the needs of individuals like Ernie, Mike, and Sue. And we successfully changed the regulatory environment to support such systems. We are now in the manufacturing and implementation stage with plans to introduce during the 2018 and 2020 election cycle a user-friendly ballot marking device with features to serve all voters, vote centers located throughout the county available to all voters over a 10-day voting period, an interactive sample ballot that offers an ability to personalize and customize your participation, an enhanced vote-by-mail program, and a modern auditable vote tally system, all components of a publicly owned, non-proprietary system infrastructure. We are on the threshold of offering a new voting experience that can easily be adapted to future changes in election laws, voter behavior, or advances in technology. One that can be shared and adapted to other jurisdictions across the country and that frees us from the constraints and limitations of the past. We're excited to move forward and to apply what we've learned to other public sector challenges and systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pete?
One of the questions I had about this project, which is really, I think, an amazing mixture of public engagement and expert design, is I wasn't sure, as we were looking to that question of transferability or replicability, whether you were proposing that the process by which you've arrived at this new system was the thing that was worthy of transfer, or the actual voting machine, which you, as you say, you're already in the manufacturing stage, whether that was the transferring piece. I know from others in California, and certainly the many counties that are, as you have here in your application, are watching with bated breath what comes out of LA County. They're not so much interested in trying to replicate the 8-year process that got you to this place, but they are very interested in the technology. So just a question about process versus product.
Yeah, I think from the beginning, I think the answer to your question is both. We fundamentally, when we set out to do this, we knew it was it's an unusual challenge, and we knew the approach we were taking was going to be unique. Along the way, at the beginning, we wanted to be sure whatever we did in the voting space was transferable to other jurisdictions, but also in a way that was adaptable. We knew that Los Angeles County, because we're larger than most states, we're very unusual as a voting jurisdiction, and that most states or most counties may not have the capacity to support a system themselves the way we have that ability. So we still wanted them to be able to leverage the product that we come up with in their own environment. So that was the case with regard to the voting process. Really wanted to be able to have publicly owned, open source based voting systems available in the market. And there is, as you say, great interest in that amongst other jurisdictions. But we also recognize that the process we were going through is something that should be transferable to other big complex problems like the problem we face. So not just related to voting, but our hope is to put this in a toolkit as something that can be replicated in other jurisdictions when they're facing a challenge like we did, where we were waiting for a market solution that simply wasn't coming, and we faced a kind of a pivotal point where we could either wait for our current system to fail and not have anything to replace it with, or we could step forward and create a system that would replace it ourselves.
And I would just add that we continuously meet with other jurisdictions that are interested in the process. So we're constantly sharing the information that we've learned, best practices, and we also publish all our information on our project website where various other jurisdictions follow.
Just a quick follow-up. If you could just say very briefly why there wasn't a private sector solution forthcoming.
Two reasons. One, in California, as you well know, we faced regulatory gridlock. We had counties surrounding us that had used the federal money from the Help America Vote Act to replace their voting systems, only to have those replacement voting systems decertified by the Secretary of State because of security concerns. Those counties now have the systems they purchased with that money in public storage facilities because they can't use them and nobody wants to buy them. We didn't want to be in that situation. And the other reality is simply that Los Angeles County is just a beast of a jurisdiction. We are so large and so diverse, the number of languages we need to serve, the geography we need to serve, the products that are available on the commercial market, which have shrunk because of the regulatory environment, don't have the scalability to Los Angeles County, and they consider us extremely high risk as a result of that.
Thanks.
Yes, David.
As I read the description, at one point it was describing how voters can customize this a little bit. I've forgotten the details, but I had the reaction of, oh, I wonder if really elderly voters might be confused. I understand you're going to test this on a large scale in 2018, but have you tested it on smaller scales with actual voters?
We have at every step of the design, we've done user testing with actual voters or potential voters. We've done it with emerging voters, trying to see what the next generation is going to look like. We've also really focused our user testing on extreme populations, believing that if we can get it right for those with the most significant needs, then it'll be right for everyone else. So as an example of that, early on when we had prototypes that were just made of foam board and just conceptual, we took those to the Cerebral Palsy Center in Los Angeles County and talked to voters there who very engaged in politics and interested in voting, never had been able to vote independently or privately in their lives. So very engaging population. They guided us to the accessibility features. We then came back 6 months later with a functional prototype. And probably one of the most fundamentally transformational moments for me in the project was we watched as each of those voters cast a ballot independently on the prototype, including a voter who was severely disabled in a wheelchair and operated the prototype using a dowel attached to his foot without any assistance of anyone else. And to watch their reaction to the hope that they would now get to vote independently and privately was pretty amazing.
That is a wonderful story. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess the question for me is the risks associated with when you roll this out to scale in the countywide election, and it hasn't been tested in that level yet. Right. And help us think about how we should think about those risks.
Well, I think first of all, we recognize those risks. We know that this was designed based on feedback from voters, but we also know that once you put it out there, that doesn't mean they're expecting it, and it doesn't mean that they know what to do with it. So we believe, and we've been very upfront with our authorizing environment, that we're going to have to do this on an incremental basis. We plan to first introduce it in early voting when traditional polling places are still open and available on the Tuesday date of the election, and then transition into full implementation. We also believe we're going to have to make a sizable investment in voter education and outreach, and we don't underestimate that. We know that this is a big move. The voters in Los Angeles County, I was sharing this last night, from the voter experience, the systems have been modified throughout the years, but the voter experience today in Los Angeles County is the same as it was in 1968. That's what you experience when you walk into a polling place. It's a big leap to move that population to something new.
So let's say everybody thinks, wow, you've done such a great job. What happens when every other jurisdiction in the United States wants to copy you?
Well, we would consider that a success.
How difficult would it be for you to absorb? You're not Diebold, so you're not selling stuff. So how would you absorb all the interest in what you're doing?
Right, and we've been very clear about that from the beginning, that we have a big job to do in LA County. We do not want to be a voting systems vendor.
Yeah.
What we want to do is make the 8 years of research, design, and development that most jurisdictions don't have the ability or capacity to do. We want to make that available. We've done that since day one in the project. All of our research, all of the design specs are on our website. They're available. And we want to model that in a way, again, that in a jurisdiction that doesn't have an internal IT support division, that they could competitively bid that and bring in a company to run it, but they would build it based on the design specs that we've developed, rather than design specs that were developed by a for-profit proprietary company.
Would somebody be able to, would Baltimore, for instance, be able to just look on your website, or would they come and visit you?
We would encourage them to do both, and at some point, once we have software and hardware, there are probably license agreements that will need to be made available to that to allow them to go out to competitive bid for that.
So to Pete's question, you do use private bidders for some of your aspects of what you've accomplished, and some of it is not.
Yes, but we use them in a different way than the traditional model. In other words, we will competitively bid to build our hardware, but we'll give them the blueprints for that hardware. And so if we need to go out in 2 years and buy more hardware, we can do a completely new bid because we own the blueprints. We aren't entering to this long-term marriage with a particular vendor. We can continue to leverage advances in technology, new entrants into the market, and in fact, we've already seen
So you
new
control the
markets.
system rather
Correct.
than being controlled by them.
Right.
That would be the big difference.
That's the key to the public ownership piece of it, right.
And has any other jurisdiction tried that? aspect?
There is a jurisdiction in Texas, Travis County, Texas, that has engaged in a similar design model. They approached this first as a technology project, more so than a user-centered project, but very similar values and principles, commitment to open source, and they're at a similar point in their project. I don't know of any others that have worked on the development side. I know that San Francisco is interested in an open source voting platform, and we have, again, many jurisdictions that are kind of waiting to see where this goes before they make their next purchase agreement.
Great. Well, this is very exciting, and congratulations on all that you've accomplished.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Well done. And having heard about that, we are going to now get to hear about the Green Bank movement by Brian Garcia and Carrie O'Neill.
Thank you,
Thank
and good
you.
afternoon. Connecticut Green Bank's simple promise of increasing affordability and accessibility to green energy has evolved into a greater commitment to our stakeholders. We believe that everything we do to help people thrive and businesses grow. We do it in the interest of achieving inclusive prosperity, not only within the country, but around the world. Connecticut recognized there will never be enough public dollars to meet its aggressive energy and climate goals. The public-private investment model we have pioneered uses scarce public dollars to attract multiples of private investment and is creating a thriving marketplace for green energy in the state. Connecticut has the highest energy costs in the country, which affects our ability to attract and retain businesses and places an undue energy burden on residents and communities. Our state's budget has been under pressure for years, making a grant-based model unsustainable. So the Green Bank sought out and forged public-private partnerships to support green energy financing. We focus our limited funds on gaps in the market where the private sector has not yet offered a viable solution. For every dollar the Green Bank puts in, there is now nearly $10 of private investment, and because of the efficient use of public funds, we recently surpassed $1 billion of total investment in Connecticut's economy. And in the process, we continue to stabilize energy costs, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and create the jobs our state so desperately needs. Now here's Carrie O'Neill, one of our sector directors.
Thanks, Brian. Here are two examples of our work. For businesses, our Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, or CPACE program, has broken new ground. We partnered with 128 towns and cities by saying green energy improvements are a public good and can be repaid on your property tax bill. Over 150 businesses have taken advantage of CPACE and will save nearly $200 million. When we started in 2013, the capital providers didn't understand CPACE, so we stepped in and used all public funds from a regional cap and trade program. Last year, we turned CPACE into a $100 million public-private partnership that now uses $9 of private capital for every $1 of public capital. And we've worked with programs across the country to help them use CPACE to fuel their own economic development. Brian talked about inclusive prosperity, and here's another great example. The issue of energy and climate change is actually linked to income, job opportunities, health, and resiliency. For our most vulnerable citizens, high energy costs are forcing them to trade off paying utilities with things like food, medicine, or housing. We knew we needed to do more to bring prosperity and reach for all. So we partnered with Posigen, a solar company from Louisiana, already serving lower income families. They combine a solar lease with an energy efficiency package that makes a big dent in families' energy expenses. One of our customers, a single mother from Bridgeport, was paying over $250 a month for electricity. She was able to go solar, a dream of hers, and drop her cost to under $100 a month. And she was so inspired by her experience, she now works for Posigen, going into homes like hers, telling her story to families about their right to take back control and more than survive, but thrive. And I don't think you could find a better ambassador.
The Connecticut Green Bank has sparked a Green Bank movement. We've seen our model applied in New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Montgomery County, Maryland, with more in the works, including Washington, D.C. And on a national scale, a senator from Maryland and a congresswoman from Connecticut will be introducing the Green Bank Act before Congress in the coming weeks. We've also presented our best practices in China, India, and South Africa, and across Latin America. Creating the nation's first green bank took the audacity and vision of Connecticut's political leaders, Governor Malloy, and the bipartisan support of the state's General Assembly. Throughout our journey, our true purpose continues to reveal itself. Yes, we believe everything we do to help people thrive and businesses grow. But we've come to appreciate that we innovate to transform lives. In our eyes, the ultimate measure of success for the Green Bank will be how well we address the adaptive challenge of providing society a gateway to inclusive prosperity. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions? Sure. David, of course.
Maybe I should ask someone
No,
else.
go ahead, go ahead.
So I live here in Massachusetts, which has used a subsidy strategy to boost solar and wind power and alternative energies. And here, companies come to your front door and knock on it and say, we can put solar panels on your roof, we'll own them, you pay nothing down, and we'll guarantee savings of X% in your monthly electricity bill. So that's the private market already very aggressively marketing to everybody in the state, or at least everybody who has a home that a satellite photo shows would be good for solar energy. So why would we need a green bank, given that the private market is already so involved and aggressive here?
So Professor Osborne, it's an honor. So it's a great question. I think when you look at and you compare states, and we do it quite a bit, when you look across the region and you look at the incentive structure here in the state of Massachusetts, they're doing a lot of deployment in rooftop solar, which is great. They're by far leading the region. You can take a look at any metric. Watts per capita, they're doing great. But when you look at the utilization of public funds that are helping to attract that private investment in your economy, and you start taking a look at metrics like dollars of incentives per watt deployed, what you can see across the region is that Connecticut is comparatively the same as Massachusetts on a watts per capita basis, but we are getting more out of the use of our public funds. So we're now, I think, an 8 times multiple in the state of Connecticut in terms of utilizing ratepayer funds versus Massachusetts. So what we're trying to do is to create a market environment where there are less and less public incentives or ratepayer incentives going into the market, and yet at the same time create a marketplace for more private investment to come in. So that's definitely a part of what we do. But to answer, further provide an answer on another product. So the leasing product that you've talked about is a great example of financial innovation. No money up front from a customer, they're immediately cash flow positive, they're saving on their electricity bill. But we found an entrepreneur several years ago who had a different idea for financial innovation, which was, let's help the homeowner realize all the value that solar PV offers. They can monetize the federal tax credit themselves. We ended up investing in this company. It's a company formed by an entrepreneur who comes out of this institution, Sarah Ross. She's from Sungage Financial. And she came to us with the proposition of, let's build a solar loan together so that we can help finance solar on homes. And what was great about that is we ended up investing $6 million in Sungage in this loan product in Connecticut. We utilized all our tools in the Green Bank toolbox. We had a loan loss reserve. We had an investment of subordinated debt. We ended up generating $6 million worth of loans. We sold $1 million of those loans through the crowd. So we sold $1 million to California, citizens in California who were buying Connecticut loans. We can't do that in Connecticut. So we were able to get $1 million back. We ended up selling the rest to a community development financial institution. But what's great about that story is that Sarah has now built a product that attracted $100 million from a credit union that said to Sarah, that's great what you did in Connecticut, We don't need that public sector credit enhancement anymore. What we believe in your product. We want you to go across this country and offer that same product in California, Texas, Florida, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts. We're going to give you $100 million to do it. So for us, that was an example where there may have been a gap in the marketplace, and now we've unlocked investment across the country.
Thank you.
I guess one other point I would make is there are, those are, mainstream companies who are marketing to mainstream customers. Another role of the Green Bank is to serve underserved markets. And not all of your private companies are going to knock on the doors in all of your neighborhoods or all your small businesses that don't have a great time getting credit. And so that's a really important role we see that we play where the private sector isn't yet playing, and we can show the way, shine the light, attract them, and then get out of the way.
And so I'm so glad you said that, because you really piqued my interest with the example you gave on your ambassador. And so can you say more about how this public role in stimulating the private market can be done in a way that pushes them toward more equity and sensibility about high housing costs and housing vulnerability?
Sure. Connecticut's a very unequal state, and many folks may not know that. But when what we do is we share the data on, how big a population, whether it's renters or low-income homeowners. We have a third of our low-income residents own their own home. And the other thing that's interesting about Connecticut is that income and credit quality don't correlate. So there's a lot of good investable homeowners who are lower income. So we've done a lot of market analysis, a lot of data analysis, and we've made that freely available. We run webinars, and we tell solar companies and energy efficiency companies about that. For years we've been doing that. But in the case of Posigen, we went out and recruited them because we knew they focused on this market. And it's great to tell all your private companies out there, but we also know to serve underserved markets, you also need folks who are going to focus on those markets. So we do that both in the affordable multifamily space and in the case of rooftop solar. So partnership forging, we're willing to forge partnerships and attract companies into markets that they might not otherwise be in.
You note here in the application that currently 2/3 of your budgeted revenues for 2017 are coming from ratepayers. What's the trajectory on that, both history and looking forward? Do you see that continue to be the vast majority of your revenues, or what's the?
Yeah, so currently we have two major revenue sources that come in. One is a system benefit fund. When the state deregulated electricity in the late 90s, it created a renewable energy investment fund. That's about $27 million a year that's come into the state. The second is we receive cap and trade allowance proceeds from RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That's about $3 million. So it's about $30 million a year that comes in. And the way our predecessor used those funds is it provided those funds to projects as grants. And the leverage was low. For every dollar we put out in terms of using those funds, it attracted a dollar of private investment. So the audacity of the legislature to change that model was we are now becoming a part of capital structures, and what that's helping us do is leverage every dollar to eight more dollars into the economy. But it is those dollars that help provide the support to us. But what we've also been able to do over the course of the last 5 years is we've gone from that zero-based budget of money in, money out, to in fact building a balance sheet for the organization. So we've now built a really strong financial position that now allows us to go out and talk to private banks. So in our application, we talked about a moment being when Bank of America came to us and said, we believe in what you're doing. We want to lend to the Green Bank because you're delivering results and because you have a strong balance sheet. That's where we now take the next step in our model, because we're now moving to private investors investing in the state of Connecticut.
Just a quick note on that to follow up, because you did note that B of A loan, that was a 1% interest loan. Who were you working with specific? Was that a specific type of loan that B of A was?
Yeah, so we were at an energy efficiency conference about a year ago, and one of the leaders of the community development arm of B of A came up to us after that plenary session on the Green Bank movement and said, BAML should be investing in green banks. And we ended up setting a meeting. He's also partnering with the Catalytic Climate Fund, which is also a part of Bank of America. It's the climate change side of the organization. So between the two, we met with them. They were impressed with what we're doing, and we're now working on term sheets. And
it's kind of that pivot of, you know, community development is often thought of as housing and things like that. Health services, green banks are a form of community development, getting at those equity and justice issues. So it was a really cool moment.
Thank you.
Great. Just briefly, I can see that you've spread your message across the United States and into the world. And how about into the next election in Connecticut?
So, you know, we have bipartisan support of the Connecticut General Assembly. I mean, we just issued a press release yesterday on it, and it was great to see the support across the aisles in terms of what we're doing. You could imagine public-private partnerships and leveraging limited public funds to mobilize private investment. That resonates to everyone. And I just think the legislature recognizes what we're doing, Republicans and Democrats alike. So we feel good about that. Now, the state is in difficult budget periods, right? They have to manage a $40 billion two-year budget. We have a $5 billion deficit. So I think, you know, as we look at what we do, we would never envy the position that they're in, having to make those sorts of decisions of, you know, reducing support for municipalities, you know, reducing services, reducing funds to bury the poor, you know. So we are a part of delivering a different solution to the state of Connecticut.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you.
That was very, very impressive. And now we get to hear, once again, an application from New York City. They usually have one every year, and we get to hear about what they've done on pre-K. So come forward, please. We're hearing from Josh Wallach and Ursulina Ramirez.
Hello.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. In 2014, this administration came in with a moral and educational imperative, and that was to ensure that all of our children were ready to succeed when they entered kindergarten. Sorry. At the core, we wanted to address educational inequalities earlier. We focused on pre-K because studies have shown that high-quality pre-K had long-term behavioral and academic outcomes. In our first few weeks in our office, we pulled together a working group comprised of internal and external stakeholders, and they were charged with developing a strategy and operational plan to make pre-K for all a reality in just 2 years. We had to work with a sense of urgency because, as we all know, you're only 4 once. So here we are today, and to give you a sense of scope, in 2013, 19,000 4-year-olds were enrolled in full-day pre-K. And 2 years later, we had tripled that number, with nearly 70,000 students and 4-year-olds in our pre-K program.
There were really 3 challenges for making the vision of pre-K for all a reality, and we think that they are applicable in some ways regardless of scale. The first and second you can summarize as build it and make sure they come. Making sure we had quality providers of pre-K throughout the city, and that kids representing the full diversity of New York City wound up attending pre-K. The backbone of meeting these challenges was creating a data system that enabled our people to make good, fast bets and collaborate between multiple city agencies to get the job done. We used that to call out to community-based organizations and schools throughout the city. We streamlined parts of our procurement process so we had time to visit sites personally and spend time there getting to know them. We helped our local schools and community-based groups bring new classrooms online quickly by creating an online teacher recruitment tool and by assisting them with construction and permitting. Truly an entire government effort. Then make sure they come. We brought city agencies together to construct a list of all families in New York City that had children that were 4 years old and loaded it into one campaign database. We set up an outreach team that we recruited from all of our neighborhoods speaking multiple languages to make hundreds of thousands of phone calls and hold dozens of events throughout New York City over the past several years to make sure that every family understood the benefits of pre-K and understood how to apply. And we set up a streamlined enrollment process where families could choose a set of programs in one stop, online, in person, or over the phone, and get matched automatically to their highest choice with an opening. Now over 85% of our families get one of their top 3 choices for pre-K program. And we wound up in the end with classes that represent New York City geographically and by race and income. And the third challenge was really to build quality from the beginning as we were building access. The research is clear that only high quality pre-K produces the outcomes we seek. And the mandate that we got was to build quality while we built access. And so we used, again, research and data to build a system for continuous improvement, to define, measure, and manage quality. We built a holistic picture of quality at each site using valid, reliable measures, plus additional teacher and family survey data, and we publish it online every year for every family to see as they choose their program. We then use that to vary the levels of support we provide from coaches and social workers. We see how programs respond to that support by the end of the year, and then vary the dosage of support again. And we use that to make the difficult decisions about whether a program should return and continue to be a pre-K for all program. And the result so far is that our programs are performing on average at levels that the highest performing pre-K programs in the country have shown at a similar year of implementation, even though we scaled faster than other programs had. We've learned a great deal as we've addressed these challenges, and we've shared our lessons learned and learned from other cities through a learning lab that we hosted in New York City earlier this school year. 12 districts came to join us and learn more. But we know that to achieve the original purpose of addressing educational inequality, we cannot stop with pre-K for all.
So as Josh has noted, we knew our work to address equity and excellence couldn't stop with just pre-K. So we recently announced that we would replicate the success of pre-K for all with 3K for all, with a hope of reaching children at a younger age. Additionally, we developed a continuum of research-based for all initiatives that progress with our students as they go through the pre-K to 12 continuum. These initiatives include universal literacy by 2nd grade, algebra for all, AP for all, as well as others. Each of these initiatives were developed with the same sense of urgency as pre-K for all, with aggressive implementation plans and data tools to track their success, with the goal of making sure all of our students are ready for success in the 21st century. Thank you.
Well, that was terrific. I just want you to know that we were all impressed that you could get 70,000 kids done so quickly. That was really, really impressive. Do any of you have any questions? I did. How did you get it done so quickly? I mean, with such high quality.
Yeah.
That was really quite stunning.
And if I could add to that, Kathleen?
Sure.
If you could help in answering it, help us think about how are those lessons transferable to our other jurisdictions that have this as a goal?
Yes. So I think one of the key lessons we learned is build on what's already working. And New York City, I think, as do many cities, have some infrastructure to provide quality early childhood education in their jurisdiction. Child care programs, Head Start programs run by private groups, district school programs. And what we did initially is through the tools that we built, reach out to them and help them expand their capacity to serve kids, either converting from half-day programs to full-day programs or adding classrooms to programs that were already achieving high quality. And I think that we made use of that infrastructure to do such a rapid expansion.
Okay, so that's good to think about, because so 70,000, for instance, my children are in a pre-K in Washington. I think we have 6,000. So 70,000 seems absurdly large, but maybe it's 70,000 off a much larger base.
Yeah, well, when we came in, there were 20,000 children that were in free full-day high-quality pre-K, but there were another 25,000 or so that were in half-day. And so quite a bit of what we did in the first year is help those programs expand. So they had to add classrooms to...
That makes it easier to do.
Yeah.
It makes it, got it.
So I think that's a lesson for, just to say, for other cities as well, which is expand on the partnerships you already have and help build quality and access to those programs, which then in turn builds excitement and energy behind expansion.
So one way it's doubling what you did. Yes, David.
So Kathleen mentioned Washington, D.C., which is generally considered the top of the heap in pre-K. They have universal pre-K for age 3 and 4. Very high spending. So you mentioned quality. Do you have any comparisons of quality between your program and Washington, D.C.'s?
So essentially where we are, and we compare using these national tools that are used for classroom observations, is we're at a similar point of where programs like Boston and Abbott and D.C. were at this phase of their implementation, so 3 years in. DC's a little bit older, so they've had a little bit more time to build quality. But we're seeing comparable quality levels and ones that are highly correlated with improved child outcomes over time. So those are the two ways we look at it.
Yes, Pete?
This seems in some ways to be a pre-K school choice program. It was interesting, one of the anomalies that was reported here is that around 56 or 57% of the schools that are part of this program are actually not public schools.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about how those relationships were developed so quickly? It would be understandable if this was really being generated entirely out of the public system, that those relationships would already be existing. But how much of that relationship building and bringing them on board needed to happen?
The answer is we had a good start, but quite a bit of work, and it goes on. And I think you raise an interesting point in that we really did come to this with a spirit of sort of honoring the work that had already been done in many communities to provide quality early childhood education. And we wanted to show families and providers that we wanted to build on that and not replace it. And so we set out very intentionally to start first by asking those providers whether they wanted to expand their offerings, expand to full day, and expand the number of kids they served. And they knew right away that full day was the way to go, and they were just waiting for the opportunity to do that. Then we had to do the work of building the trust, and part of this was putting everybody on the same playing field for application and enrollment. Prior to our arrival, there were two separate admission systems, one for district schools and one for private community-based organizations. The district schools went first, and then the CBOs went. We brought them together onto one data platform so families could choose between all of them and list up to 12 choices, a mix of district schools and private organizations. And what we found is that about half the families put a district school first and half the families put a CBO first. And that really helped to build the trust with the CBOs because they saw we sort of walked the walk and put them on a level playing field with district schools.
And I would just like to add that some of these CBOs have been in communities for an extended period of time, and so it's really important for, at least for the families, having a sense of continuity, but just also making sure that they, can meet our standards of what high quality pre-K looks like. So really, it was a lot of engagement process with the CBO providers, and they've been fantastic along the way.
But as you said, you had Montessori schools as part of this, and others that are, from a methodology standpoint are fairly well established as well.
That's right. And so we also had to demonstrate and also continue to work on showing that we have high standards, and we hold programs accountable to those, but we also understand the diverse ways that programs can get there. And we train our instructional coaches and social workers who support those programs to be sensitive to that and to learn about the approach and to try to help support them do that approach better. And as long as they meet those standards, that's great.
Thanks.
So your write-up mentioned that 85% of the funds for this come from the state of New York.
Yes.
Was that something that happened automatically because there was already a state program, or did you have to get the legislature to appropriate a lot of money to do this?
I mean, as soon as we came in as an administration, as I said, we pulled together this working group that really developed kind of a holistic plan and implementation plan and our budgetary needs. And it was a lot of aggressive advocacy on the part of the city, but also parents and families who really helped us get the support that we needed from the state. But I think, if Josh...
Yeah, no, and I would say, and in the end, we wound up with the support of both sides of the state legislature and the governor, and that was critical. And they did put in an additional increment of $300 million that helped us get to full-day, free, high-quality pre-K for all. And that commitment has continued each year in the budget process as we've gone.
Great.
So when you started with CBO, which was not particularly good, let's just say, what techniques did you use to get them to be up to standard? Or,
yes.
Because it's hard, my experience is, it's hard to get people to change.
Yeah.
Anybody.
So we've taken what the research shows is the most effective, we think the most effective approach, which is a combination of really high quality learning opportunities for teachers and leaders to come together. District schools and CBOs come together to learn together. And then individual coaches that go into programs and form relationships with the leaders and teachers there and talk to them about what needs to change. And it's really those one-on-one coaching relationships that begin to move the numbers on the tools that we use. And what we have to do as a system is be very smart about allocating that scarce time and expertise to the programs that need it most. And so we do a lot of work with data to send support where it's needed most and where it can have the greatest impact.
Okay.
One quick last question. You mentioned CBOs, private providers, and district schools. How about charter schools? Are they participating?
Yes, charter schools have participated. We have about 20 of them that are part of the Pre-K for All program, and we invite them to apply every year. We're eager to grow those partnerships, and families can elect to send their kids to Pre-K for All there.
Yes, Pete.
Yeah, you know, it's noted that in New York City, the average cost per seat is $12,000.
Yes.
Which is significantly more than most of the major other school systems. Is there a part of what's happened here that because of those resources on a per seat basis that might not be transferable, or is that not enough of a factor to understand how this could be transferable?
Sorry, the question is whether that amount of money
Has made it more possible to do this quick rollout and develop these relationships and have the outreach teams that you had in place and do the testing and the rest of that's part of this.
I would say the per student cost turns out to be comparable to systems like the Abbott districts in New Jersey and Boston, and to some extent DC, the high quality programs. I would also say that I think that the real estate costs in New York also bring up the per seat cost, and so there are ways of doing this in other jurisdictions where real estate is not quite at a premium with a lot of the supports and systems that we've built. And they're really smart people that are doing cost studies now to figure out which parts of the expenses are due to which factors and how to replicate the supports, which are really the key to quality and the key to the outcomes.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
That
you.
was terrific to hear, and congratulations for all you and for all those kids and
Thank
their
you.
families. Really wonderful. And now we get to hear about digital democracy from California State University, presented by Sam Blakesley and Christine Robertson. Really look forward to this presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. I'm Dr. Sam Blakesley here today with Christine Robertson. Christine and I co-founded Digital Democracy, a project born out of our experience working in the state legislature. Me as an elected member of the California State Assembly and the State Senate, Christine as the chief of staff in both bodies. Digital democracy pairs emerging technologies with public policy reforms to drive real accountability in state legislatures. As legislative practitioners, we were alarmed that California, like other states in the nation, produces no written or searchable record documenting what actually occurs during the thousands of hours of committee hearings and floor debate. For years, I observed that the only people consistently in the room monitoring the discussions that are occurring are lobbyists. They're like intelligence officers, diligently collecting information about the hearing dynamic itself, what concerns are being voiced, which arguments are working, which legislators are open to persuasion, and so on. But this uniquely actionable information set, the actual debate and discussion, was only available to those who were in the room. Everyone else, the citizen, the community activist, the reporter, they were functionally shut out of the process. They could only obtain a static snapshot of what had happened, a vote tally and the amended text after it left the committee, with no idea why the bill had changed, who had advocated for those changes, and which issues and which members may still be in flux. It became obvious that a searchable record of the actual debate and discussion was a uniquely powerful resource for anyone interested in effectively engaging the state legislature and driving policies from that organization. Launched in 2015, the first phase of development focused on transparency. The platform uses advanced technologies such as natural language processing, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to convert the legislature's video feed into a searchable full-text transcript, complete with speaker information. And that information is contextualized with relevant information that pertains to the bills, the lobbyists, and the campaign contribution data that attach to every one of those conversations. Digital democracy empowers users with the same actionable insider information that's used by lobbyists for precision advocacy. Now, here to talk about the second and current phase of our work, impact and engagement, is Christine Robertson.
Thank you. The second phase focuses on empowering stakeholders, specifically community advocates and press, to leverage our content for engagement, accountability, and reform. Tools within the system allow users to create email alerts, video clips, and share engaging video content through social media to educate and activate their community networks. Developed at the request of community advocacy organizations, we are now in initial deployment of our engagement platform, a customizable, brandable version of digital democracy hosted directly on any organization's website. The engagement platform offers an action center through which organizations can design sophisticated grassroots advocacy campaigns. Our media collaborations include partnering with Pulitzer Prize-winning PolitiFacts to launch the nation's first automated State House fact-check feed that algorithmically mines our transcripts and surfaces fact-checkable statements by lawmakers. We're developing district-specific content feeds to resource hometown papers with information and video links summarizing what their representatives said and did any given week. And we're pairing university data scientists with investigative reporters to query our big data to reveal the underlying factors that drive legislative outcomes. Following the successful launch of our California platform, earlier this year we scaled into New York and will go live in Florida and Texas in January 2018. Together, these 4 states represent 1/3 of the US population. In addition to state scaling, the cities of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego asked us to collaborate on a local government version of digital democracy. And finally, we're laying the technical groundwork to unlock up to 30 California state regulatory agencies, allowing the public to monitor the entire life cycle of public policy, from legislative enactment through the promulgation of rules and regulations implementing statutes. The successful launch of digital democracy educated the press and public that video coverage of legislative hearings was incomplete and sometimes illegal to use. This laid a groundwork for a series of subsequent policy reforms. Proposition 54, a statewide ballot measure co-sponsored by Dr. Blakesley amending the California Constitution, was passed in November 2016 with over 65% support. The measure requires that the legislature provide comprehensive video coverage of all proceedings and eliminated the prior statute that criminalized the use of hearing videos as political speech. Within its first years, digital democracy has begun a virtuous cycle of developing innovative technologies, unlocking actionable data, connecting the data with users, and driving policy reforms to remove these barriers, and then continue scaling. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Pete, thank you.
Hi. As you mentioned just towards the tail end, Christine, the part of this, and this is resonant with many of the applications here that we see, that there is part of this where there's real innovation, but the innovation also has to drive innovative regulation and legislation to enable this. And obviously this is the case in California. First, to this question of transferability, do you have a sense as to how many other states have these regulations around the illegality of using these transcripts? And to that point, how much other regulatory or legislative groundwork would have to be done in these other states to enable the use of digital democracy?
Sure, it's a very good question. We've identified about a dozen states that have explicit reuse prohibitions where they assert copyright ownership of their hearing videos. And under federal law, states retain the right to copyright public records. So the legality of these copyright reuse policies is a subject of great legal debate. It's never been adjudicated in the courts, but there is some precedence that's been laid down in California, as well as a recent court ruling in federal court in Texas this last December, where although it wasn't appealed by the states were sued, challenging the legality of their reuse limitations, and the court found that the reuse limitations were a violation of the First Amendment. So we believe that although states do assert some copyright ownership and limitations, that they are vulnerable to legal challenge and probably are not constitutional.
And so just a quick follow-up then, on the other states you mentioned that you're working with, these very large states, New York, Florida, and others, are those part of these dozen states, or are they just ones that don't have
No,
those
these are
currently?
states that do not have an existing reuse limitation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Linda.
I'd be interested in examples that you can give of how the platform has been used to actually change the debate on a live matter that's before a legislature.
Sure. So we have a few different examples. I'll give an example from a user that used the platform to help craft legislation. We had a citizen, she was a mother. Her adult daughter was developmentally disabled and died in the care of state care providers, and she identified an issue, a statutory issue, where there was an inadequate training requirement. She approached her local representative and said, I'd like you to author legislation. He said, I would like you, the mother, to draft legislation, bring it back to me. She did, and then he asked her, now we've received opposition, please figure out how to remove the opposition. So she called us and said, what do I do? I'm a mom. And so we walked her through the platform, and she learned from the platform how to do exactly what Dr. Blakeslee said, gather intelligence about the committee members, prior legislation that was related, what the arguments had been on those prior measures, which members of the committee seemed amenable to the types of issues that she wanted to raise, how those members of the committee interacted with the lobbyists that would be representing the opposition that she needed to navigate around. And from working through the platform, she was able to develop a custom advocacy strategy that she then brought back to the legislative office. We also have community organizations. One in particular represents small business owners in California that are immigrants. A lot of them are English language learners, and they deal with what are known as predatory lawsuits run the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this organization has used the platform to mine our video content, because this is the context in which complex bills are discussed in plain language. So when witnesses come in, when authors come in to present bills, they describe the heart of the issue, why this issue should be addressed in whatever particular way is being proposed in the measure, and then hear debating perspectives from witnesses on both sides of the issue. And so this organization is using this plain language discussion around the issue to disseminate content through social media to their grassroots membership, to educate them about the issues without having to send them very difficult, terse bill text, which is very intimidating, particularly for somebody that is an immigrant that may be an English language learner. And then also, they are bringing in their members to present first-person testimony to articulate how whatever the proposal is would impact them and their community, and then sharing those clips out with the network so that their grassroots members are not only hearing the issue discussed in an accessible way, but they're seeing the faces of their neighbors, their community partners participating in the process, and it's designed to lower the intimidation factor and draw them into engagement and advocacy.
The tool is designed to level the playing field. Obviously, powerful special interests in state houses obviously can hire very competent lobbyists who are there 24/7, essentially working the building. But what we found when we served in the legislature was that there were huge numbers of organizations with grassroots members who were very passionate about trying to tackle their problem. There's veteran issues or homeless issues or healthcare issues or housing issues, but they didn't have the money, the resources, or ability to engage the way these powerful entities that had on-site lobbyists could. So this tool is designed essentially to commoditize, to take technology and put into the hands of all these grassroots organizations on their own website. So they're talking to their own members transparently right through our tool without anyone knowing it's our tool. It's now their tool to be able to activate their organizations, their members, to talk to their media, to talk to their legislator, to talk to their hometown paper, and be able to mobilize, but with timely information that pertains to the actual committee hearing that is in play. And as we've seen with the resistance movement and other efforts around the nation, there's boundless energy to try and effect transformation. But there are very few tools that actually can go into the hands of those people with energy to affect the decision makers, because there's this firewall between them. This technology breaks down that firewall so they can get right in the room and engage and activate just the way powerful special interests do.
Yeah, Dave.
As you said, you're rolling out phase 2 now, which focuses on engagement with just those advocacy groups. How long do you think it'll be before you get to a kind of critical mass where this technology is actually used pretty widely and has begun to have a significant impact on the democratic process in California?
You know, and there's two ways of looking at that. One could be impact is defined by volume, the number of engagements. Another metric would be the effectiveness with which organizations use it for impact. And so we've already seen examples of the latter, where organizations are using it and they believe that they are increasing pressure on their district representative because they've been able to mobilize community members to pay attention to issues and sensitive votes that the community otherwise would not have noticed. In terms of volume, right now, one of the things that we're doing this year is we're working with community foundations to put the tool in the hands of community nonprofits. And so our partner for that is an organization called Cal Nonprofits, and they are like a trade association for California nonprofits, and they have 10,000 statewide members. And so we're working with them to have open, free trainings for these community nonprofits and then resource them with this engagement version of our platform. So by connecting with partners like Cal Nonprofits, we think that we'll be able to have wide adoption in a relatively short time frame.
And if I could share one more element to the adoption piece, which I think is relevant. As you know, the number of State House reporters has fallen dramatically, almost catastrophically. The ability to actually report what's happening in any State House has become increasingly challenging as what attention that does exist typically goes to DC. This tool is also designed to put into the hands of every hometown newspaper with this email alerts, information about what their legislator has been doing with almost immediate notification when your legislator speaks. Generally when they speak on a particular bill of interest, when they speak on a topic of interest, you create very sophisticated queries, put that into the system, and then it will speak to any reporter or any editor or any publisher in any paper showing exactly what their legislator has been up to. So you suddenly turn all these hometown papers into State House reporters because they have primary source material. They can see exactly what that legislator said on the record. They don't have to make a phone call and get that legislator to talk back to them, because oftentimes they won't return that call. They have primary source material. So as former practitioners of the legislative process, we really tried to design a tool that would create maximum impact, because we knew that when people were talking about what we were doing in our district, it got our attention. I mean, it was all well and good to be talking and spamming our fax machine and doing all the things that creates volume, but when we saw people knew what we were doing and talking with their hometown paper, talking with their networks, talking with their PTA, we took that very, very seriously. So this entire concept is built around creating tools that will drive the way legislators think and act and behave, which we believe will produce better governance.
Linda, thank you.
We noticed the army of students that were involved in helping you to stand this up, and we're curious on the replication. Do you need an army of students in every jurisdiction?
So this is an ongoing R&D project, and I hope it will remain an ongoing R&D project for a long time, because one of the things that we're trying to do is continually increase our utilization of artificial intelligence and other technologies to produce transcripts, speaker identification in a timely and accurate manner. And so our use of students, I imagine, will remain pretty strong for the foreseeable future. That said, the addition of new states or new jurisdictions doesn't necessarily proportionately increase the number of student headcount. And so as we scale and add new states, as we add agencies, we don't see this massive need to add new students. So as we scale, we're scaling in-house. We're not seeking to replicate this in other state universities. We're adding states that's based at the California State University.
Okay, thank you. Your time is up, but I'm going to ask you a question that I learned last night because I found it so fascinating. Could you just, for our audience and for this group, describe how many hours the legislatures in each legislature meet?
Sure.
Because I found this, you're just going to have to bear with me because this is my point of privilege question.
So every state is very, very different, which is one of the wonderful things, one of the challenging things about what we do is making sure that we are adapting to every state. And so a state like California averages about 1,500 hours of annual hearings. That's committees and floor sessions. But the size of the state, the size of the issues, the size of the population has no bearing on the frequency or the duration with which legislatures meet. So the state of Texas does just over twice as many hearing hours as California. The state of Oregon does more than California, while the state of Colorado does about a quarter of the hours of California, and Hawaii does a fraction of Colorado. So some states are down a couple hundred, whereas other states are up in the several thousand.
So I thought you'd like to know how hard your legislators actually work. It has nothing to do with what they're paid or how much work they actually have to do. Thank you very much. We get a 10-minute break from that.
That stunned me when I started the answer.
Thank you. You get a 10-minute break, and then we'll be all back here. Oh, no, you get a 6.5-minute break. Okay.
Some of the states, the legislature is in session for like
All right. Come on, Hampton. Yay. We're going to hear from Mary Bunting and Chris Osby-Sneed. And just so you know, David Osborne said to me, oh, Hampton has been on the front lines on so many issues in so many ways for at least 20 years. So it's great to have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Mary Bunting, and I became the Hampton City Manager in 2010 as the housing decline crippled revenues. In my first months, I realized we were going to have to make significant budget cuts. And I didn't want to do it alone, because I knew that every service had a constituency, and any cuts would not be well received. Hampton had a strong tradition of community involvement, so it was natural to turn to that process to get input.
Hi, I'm Chris Sneed. I was the budget director then, and I didn't think it would work. We had tried on many occasions to get citizens out to give input on our capital improvement project. I thought it would be an exercise in frustration for a small staff already working long hours.
The typical budget process is reactive. The manager recommends a budget. The residents who don't like it show up and protest. So council's wanting to be responsive, restore the programs, and cut others, except for there's no time for people to react to that second round of cuts. So they typically get approved regardless of whether they were the best choices. I wanted to change this. I wanted to put the input on the front end instead, so we could make sure we made the best possible decisions, and the council could know that they were getting input from the entire community, not just those who were unhappy with the first round of cuts. We wanted to frame this as a discussion about outcomes, what services we valued as a community, and build a body of evidence for those choices. We called it I Value, and we went everywhere. To neighborhood associations, civic organizations, the YMCA, coffee shops, online chats, PTAs, you get the picture.
It worked because we went to the people instead of the people coming to us. We used keypad polling technology for the larger meetings, and residents really liked it because it was anonymous. They didn't have to voice their opinions at all out loud. Plus, everyone gave their views on every topic, not just their pet issues. We could hear moderate views and not just the loudest voices. Over 1,000 people participated in some form. The keypad technology also enabled a different conversation. Many people believe that everyone sees the world the way they do. But when the instant polling results appeared on the screen, they realized that their neighbors had different views. That forced new understandings.
Now, staff was worried that citizens wouldn't make good choices, but it turned out that there were only 2 areas where citizens and staff disagreed. For example, we had been prepared to recommend scaling back library hours, but the public saw the library as an absolute need, so we looked elsewhere. The budget I ultimately proposed balanced $20 million of a gap, yet passed with little opposition, even from those who ultimately had their services cut. The next year, we polled on whether remaining services should be maintained, reduced, or eliminated, and added online polling that mirrored the keypad polling. Participation grew by 27%. In the third year of the housing decline, more cuts were needed, so we started asking about the willingness to raise taxes. Our department had submitted their potential cuts, and we took those specific cuts to the public for them to say whether they could live with the cuts or not. Frankly, residents didn't support many more cuts, and we heard a willingness to consider a tax rate increase. However, it was also an election year, so we did what we could and continued to streamline.
I had retired and was one of the people elected to city council that spring. By the next year, it was clear to council that we couldn't cut our way out of this budget situation. In addition, our school system had been hit with a double whammy, declining local revenues as well as state cuts. It could have been an ugly battle with the school board and the city fighting each other in a public arena over limited funds.
Instead, we worked together with a joint effort by both elected bodies and staffs. We showed residents the cuts we had both made as well as the operating efficiencies we had achieved, but we also showed them how much their tax bills had dropped due to the residential real estate value decline. We did this neighborhood by neighborhood with charts. The school superintendent and I introduced that year's I Value polling theme. Do you want to continue to divest in services and programs for no tax increase, or do you want to protect programs with an increase in the property tax rate or invest in the future with a larger increase? Participation skyrocketed. Nearly 5,000 people were involved.
That's a lot. I won office with about 7,000 votes. The technology is what allows this to work. If those 5,000 people had each spoken 3 minutes at a public hearing, we'd have been stuck in council chambers night and day for nearly 10 days. But the truth is that without iValue, we probably never would have heard from that many people.
Of everyone who participated, nearly 90% supported raising the tax rate, even by substantial amounts. Knowing this community support existed before we finalized our budget enabled the superintendent and I to propose budgets that not only protected services but invested in strategic priorities like a one-to-one laptop initiative for middle and high school students.
Trust me, when citizens in Hampton do not approve, they come out in droves. Instead, almost all of those who did come to the traditional council hearings supported the increase. We approved a 20-cent, almost 20% increase in the tax rate for homeowners, and every one of us who voted for that tax increase got reelected in a citywide election, at-large election. If not for the iValue framework and technology, it wouldn't have happened. iValue is a paradigm shift in the way we do business. It resonates through everything we do now, whether it's the consideration of a capital improvement project, such as an aquatic center, or considering animal tethering. Involving public upfront before budgets are released or decisions make it the traditional public hearing phase increases acceptance for decisions even when residents don't personally agree.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, can I ask you, I thought it was so interesting how, you know, you did this process and people for a couple of years just accepted the reductions in services, and then at one point they changed their mind and they actually not only wanted to not accept the reduction in services, they wanted new services. In fact, they wanted a swimming pool. So what do you think happened?
Well, I think the issue is involving the public upfront and the trade-offs and giving them, building trust over time with transparent conversations, having them go through the struggles that staff and elected officials go through builds understanding. And so everyone thinks there's fat and waste and they can cut without having to sacrifice anything, but when they're forced to wrestle with those decisions themselves, they realize that's a myth. It's not reality. And so then they weigh, as a community, what is most important to them. And so that's really the innovation here, is involving people up front, trusting that they're smart enough that when given the right data and the context, that they will make the right decisions for the community.
Thank you. Pete?
So I've consulted with dozens of cities in California around public budgeting projects, and one of the things I've learned is that there can be a real distinction in how electeds and staff view public engagement, especially around budgets. Chris, you served both on staff and as elected, and obviously you, Mary, have served on the administrative side. Could you talk a little bit about the changing dynamic of first how council and staff view public engagement around budgets? Just to be clear about it, my understanding has always been that staff sees the public as a nuisance, and elected see the public as someone to be steered towards the ballot box to vote for them, right? But these are much tougher decisions, and like you're saying, you're trying to move the public towards making nuanced trade-off decisions. So the culture change that needs to happen both between electeds and staff and even just within the staff side.
Well, I'll just start off and then let Chris give you her perspective, having done both roles. I really saw it as my job as manager to build a body of evidence for council. When I knew we had to cut $20 million, I knew anything I proposed was going to go through that typical process. Someone's going to say, no, those aren't the right cuts. Even if we use really great analytics about return on investment and number of people impacted in the whole 9 yards. And I was setting the council up to be crucified, frankly, with having to cut that much money. So my thought was, let me help council by getting ahead and building that larger body of evidence about what the larger community really wanted. Because we typically only hear in a public hearing from the people who are against something,
right,
not the people who are for it. So I tried to convince staff that this was going to help staff in the long run, because we would be able to provide the analytics that would make sense and help citizens and the council make the right decisions without having adverse unintended consequences. And I thought that would help the council in their jobs too, so that they can have a better sense of the true community feel.
And as a staff person, when I was the budget director, like I said, I was totally against it. We had tried many times to get citizen input into our budgeting process. We would attend meetings and only 2 people would come. And that's where I think the idea of being anonymous and not having to be able to get up and say anything but to vote on things really brought people together. And it let them be able to have their voice without their neighbor knowing how they really felt about a situation. Once I became an elected official, I really valued that program because, for instance, we just passed an increase on RVs. At first, we had no RV taxes. And we used the polling process to do that. And 85% of the residents said, yes, we would love to have some type of tax on RVs. We had already done it on boats. And so if we had really hadn't used that technology or that program, we would have only heard from those people who owned RVs and didn't want the tax. So it's very helpful.
Linda?
So maybe following up on that a little bit, the anonymity piece actually worried me a little bit when you said it, because what I'm curious about is to what extent has this brought forward people who don't normally participate, and particularly what can you tell us about underrepresented communities, and has it posed any issue where the vocal community actually has gotten more vocal because of access to technology or just network and advocacy and figuring out how to get all their friends to, hammer, on the website?
Yeah, well, I will say, I think that was a fear, but it hasn't borne out. Particularly in the in-person polling, where you can see the immediate results, it enables people, particularly those in a minority on an issue, I don't mean demographic minorities, but to see that there are other people who think differently than them. And what we hear from what you'd call the silent majority is a lot of times they don't want to come to a meeting and be badgered into submission by a vocal minority. And so the anonymity allows people to come and feel like they can express their opinions. The opinions get immediately displayed on the screen after each question, so they get to give their input but not have to face this animosity. Now, after that, we do have an open discussion, so people can explore these differences and talk through those kinds of things. In the online polling, I will say there is the potential for someone to do that, but because we're doing so many other things, we're going to other groups. When we go to other groups, whether it's a PTA or neighborhood civic association, we take very clear notes. We take a recorder with us. They take notes. We print it out. We say, is this what you want posted on the website? That neighborhood civic organization says, yes, that's what we want. We put it out there. So the people who might try to organize a movement know that we're going to so many other places and that we're being transparent in the data that we're providing, that you've got to manipulate all of those places, not just one space. The one space that they have the potential to do that potentially is on the online polling, but council looks at the balance of all of the input sources.
So, as my colleague here, Kathleen, said, your city has been known for 30 years as very, very innovative, and you've built a special culture and you've built a special relationship with citizens. I think citizen trust in government, in local government in Hampton is probably pretty high. You do an annual survey, you get a lot of feedback, you created neighborhood strategies, on and on. So could other cities which don't have that culture make this work as well? Or is this something that requires something special in Hampton?
I think it's absolutely replicable elsewhere. First, let me say, we are unique that we have a longstanding organizational commitment to engagement. That's true. But we are a very transient community. We have Langley Air Force Base in our community, which means that military personnel are moving in and moving out all of the time. We have Hampton University. We have students coming in and out all the time. So not every citizen starts with that place of automatic trust. But as an example, since we were able to show success and show that residents can come to make those trade-off decisions, 2 other localities in our region, Norfolk and Portsmouth, have adopted proactive citizen input on budget. And they don't have the same cultural heritage that perhaps Hampton has. Now, that's not to say they haven't done other engagement efforts, but my point is that, yes, the culture helps. I would not have thought about it, frankly, if it weren't for our culture. I went back to a place I was comfortable with. But there's a transient enough nature of our community. We have a lot of baby boomers who've retired. We've brought in new staff. That I think this is eminently replicable. And the great news is it's cheap. It doesn't take a lot of money to buy the polling technology, and it doesn't cost anything in terms of money to go to people where they're at, which was really where we got the increase in participation, was by not expecting people to come to us, but by going to coffee shops or PTA meetings or the YMCA. Anybody can do that if they're willing to invest the time.
And we continue to do that constantly. We have our economic development director. He's out there talking about our various programs and the objectives and how it's so important to invest in economic development so that we can then increase our tax base. We have so many of our department heads going out to civic meetings and the like, just talking basically about some of the issues facing our city. Our city manager this year did a Budget 101 as one of the meetings that we had for our citizens on the budget so that they could understand how revenues work and how expenditures, what the expenditure drivers were. And by doing that and being transparent, it makes it a lot easier.
Well, do you have another? Well, I want to just say thank you so much, because it really is an inspiration to see what you've done. I think your story of getting citizens involved, getting them engaged, and getting them to agree to raise taxes on themselves in order to do something for themselves is really terrific. So bravo to you. Thank you very, very much. Now, the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. Oh my goodness, something that we've thought about all across the country.
And you've started applause for everybody, so I'm going to start applause for you.
Thank you.
Stanley Forbes and Kathy Fang. Fung. What is it?
Fun, but
Fung,
you got it.
Sorry.
Thank you. For more than 200 years, gerrymandering has been used by politicians for partisan purposes to their public's detriment.
And you know where it comes from? The state of Massachusetts. You know that.
Yes, I know. Governor Jerry in about 1812 or something.
Even before that.
Politicians picking their voters rather than the voters picking their politicians distorts and undermines the integrity of our electoral process. Gerrymandering distorts fair outcomes by minimizing the votes of some while increasing the potency of others. It suppresses voter turnout. Why vote if the outcome is preordained? And undermines a fundamental part of democracy, the ability of people to hold their politicians accountable. All of this erodes the public's trust. Presidents as diverse as Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama have urged its end. But for those 200 years, efforts to eliminate it have failed. Politicians have resisted reform, saying line drawing is inherently partisan or needs expert, but no more. The California model for redistricting, by its process, level of public participation and transparency, has proven that the people can draw fair, transparent, nonpartisan, and non-gerrymandered districts representing the people. The California process was the people's process. Application to the commission was open to all Californians. Extensive outreach was conducted to encourage communities not normally engaged in the political process to apply. In the end, more than 30,000 started the application, while nearly 5,000 completed the rigorous process. Moreover, the application was completely transparent. Candidates' applications were open to all, from financial information to essay answers to live interviews of the final 120. The result was a commission that was California. 8 men, 6 women, 3 Anglos, 4 Latinos, 2 African Americans, 3 Asians, a Native American, and a Pacific Islander. And all, whether Democrat, Republican, or non-aligned, nonpartisan, and committed to creating fair districts. The commission encouraged the public to engage. It held 34 public hearings and 70 deliberation meetings, each of which provided opportunity for public input. We met in 32 cities and 23 counties with more than 2,700 speakers and with written submissions from an additional 2,000 groups and more than 20,000 individuals. The commission also sought transparency. The meetings were broadcast live. All comments were posted on our website. The meetings were transcribed and translated into 7 languages. Interpreters were provided, as was disabled access. We had no private meetings. We did not use prior maps, no party registration, or even where the incumbents lived. But it wasn't just numbers and transparency. The public could see in real time the direct impact of their comments. The line drawing at the commission debates were entirely public. The commission had to explain and justify why each district was drawn the way it was. The state Supreme Court characterized the districts as being a product of an open, transparent, and nonpartisan redistricting process. Unlike prior redistricting, the public could trust the integrity of the process and the result. The commission and its process provides a model any state or governmental entity can use for redistricting. It is a high bar, but our democracy deserves no less.
So what is this thing that we've created, and can it be replicated? There are 3 basic elements of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. First, it is a human-centered process. That second comes out of a process that was deliberative and involved unusual political bedfellows, both in the creation but ultimately in how it was carried out. And third, it lifted up the principles of public engagement, transparency, political fairness, and public trust. What we created in 2008 came out of 3 years of a deliberative process where we brought together business, labor, environmental, civil rights, good government, and many other organizations and leaders to talk about what was possible in transforming government so that it could be functional, so that it could be responsive, and so that it could be trusted. In many ways, the process that created the Citizens Redistricting Commission was reflected in the Citizens Redistricting Commission itself and how it deliberated. In subsequent years, we used this same deliberative process to help develop transformative processes around ballot initiative reform, term limits reform, and even reforming campaign finance laws that were passed with bipartisan support and an unusual coalition of political bedfellows. Since 2011, cities like Austin, Sacramento, Minneapolis, and Santa Fe have all adopted Citizens Redistricting Commissions. And at the state level, states like Illinois, Ohio, Missouri, and Michigan are pushing for similar kinds of changes. The genius of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission is not that it was a perfect, immutable model. It's not that it was made up of 14 people or 100 hearings or any of the other mechanics. It is that it inspired people throughout the country to tackle what for 200 years was seen as impossible to tackle in the political sphere. Whether it's cities or states or even our Supreme Court, we now aspire to reform our democratic institutions to be more inclusive of all voices and ultimately to create a government that, as President Obama says, reflects our better selves.
Yes, Linda.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the outcomes? And I think sort of measuring it by how many contested seats and how it, if it has diversified the representatives that have been elected?
Well, it certainly has made it more, there's been a lot of turnover and change as a result. I can't remember the exact numbers, but we had no competitive congressional districts in California before the thing. We now have 9. We had 30.
And out of how many? Just get.
53. 53 members of Congress. We have 80 members of the Assembly. We have 38 new ones. This is the 2012 election that came out of it. We were considered. I think Politico did an analysis of what was the most competitive state in the union, and we were first, and Idaho was second. So there's been a real turnover, and I can tell you stories about some of the elections, it was because it was such a nonpartisan process. You saw traditionally powerful representatives put into the same district and have to run against each other, and a lot of representatives chose not to run because of the districts were changed and in a non-gerrymandered fashion. So there was a lot of impact.
Before the Redistricting Commission was created, we heard from civil rights groups and also women's groups that complained about the fact that in California, as in many states where the legislature draws the lines, that they were playing 3D chess. And if somebody aspired to run for a Senate seat, and they used to be an assembly person, your relationship with the president pro tem of the Senate absolutely mattered. And if you weren't on the inside, if you weren't part of the old boys club, you were excluded. You were specifically, a district would be drawn for someone else. And oftentimes that punishment would have a significant impact on the communities of people who might be emerging, who might choose to support a challenger. So in many ways, what the Redistricting Commission did in drawing lines that really reflected this huge amount of community testimony was to be responsive to our demographic changes as they were coming, instead of always looking backwards to cementing the power structures that were.
Yes, Pete, thank you.
So the reason we're in this predicament is because the self-interest rightly understood of legislators is to maintain power over these decisions. And it took a ballot initiative in California, Prop 11, to make this happen, which was not an insignificant undertaking. As we look at the question of how easy this is to transfer either to other states or municipalities, does it have to go through that kind of outsider process, or do you see prospects for the better angels, so to speak,
Well, I think that's something
to
both
be
can
at work here?
respond to.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see it happen in 3 ways. One, you're going to have the states which have an initiative process of some sort. The public interest will put it on the ballot. The second group is the courts, which are now in the process of considering a case in Supreme Court case that will be argued this fall, may determine that you cannot partisan gerrymander. And in those cases where the court rules that, we're in a position to sort of be more or less plunked down as an example that the state can use. Also, I think that with the renewed activism in the country, that you will see, even in those states that just have a legislature, the public will put pressure on the legislators to say, look, if you don't do this, we will vote you out of office. We will hold you accountable. And so it will become from sort of a backwater issue, I think. It will become an issue really on the forefront and will become a basis on which people say, I'm going to vote for you or not.
You ask a good question. So I agree with Stan that it's not limited to initiative states. I think it's important to look at where the reforms have already been implemented, sometimes so quickly that we didn't even realize it, right? So the city of Austin in Texas, for instance, looked at what just happened in California, said, that's good. Why don't we try that at a local level? And in fact, actually, many smaller jurisdictions have adopted some version of a citizen-engaged process. I won't call it always a citizens commission, but a process where they've looked at California's model and they said, this makes sense for us, right? And when you think about it, that's the beginning for percolating change all the way up to the national level, because the people who are elected at the city level eventually become your legislators at the state level, and because that process is something that they take as a norm, not as an exception, it may become something that filters up to that national level about what we should be doing for all elections. The last piece is that I think that the Supreme Court case coming out of Wisconsin, but also 2 more, one in Maryland and one in North Carolina, each represent the possibility that at one time the Supreme Court was very skeptical about, right? They always used to say, well, redistricting is fundamentally a political process, and they don't know how to get the politics out of it, particularly this kind of hyper-partisanship. We have seen in the last 2 years a sea change in the language that's coming from the Supreme Court to say, you know what, actually, maybe we can do something about it. And there are some limits to hyperpartisan gerrymandering. And we see that coming out of the states that are innovating, but even for the states that don't have an initiative process, what can we do to create some bounds? I think that's where the sanity starts coming.
I also, let me ask one other comment. I think also goes beyond the line drawing, because any state can look at California and say, whatever the issue is, this is what public participation looks like, this level of public engagement. This is what transparency looks like. And those are, I think, useful models for things beyond line drawing.
David.
The data about the 2012 elections is just stunning. I mean, for a decade, you'd had one new congressperson from California, one new member of the state legislature, and all of a sudden, 38 out of 80 assembly members were new, 9 out of 40 senators, 4 congresspeople. So we sort of are duty bound to ask, was there some other factor, or was this all because of redistricting?
I'm not here. Not sure that I know enough to say about other factors, but I know that redistricting had a role to play.
There were a number of reforms that happened at the same time. So for those people who follow California or live in it, we also had primary reforms, and shortly thereafter term limits reforms, right? But I would say that what happened in 2012 was that because the commission was drawing without regard to where incumbents lived, and they were being very responsive to community testimony about changing demographics, all of a sudden the lines that they drew were not as responsive to the existing power structure and much more responsive to the community testimony. And what that meant was that a lot of incumbents were displaced, but it also meant that there were a lot more seats that were toss-ups between sometimes Democrats and Republicans, but a lot of times also between Democrats or between Republicans, right? And it was never a given. That meant that for some people, for the first time in 20, 30 years, they actually had to earn their votes and go out and campaign and talk to voters. It changed the dynamic in so many elections in a way that I think voters really felt like, wow, this thing that we created has so many effects because now I get to see and hear and feel like I actually have a choice when it comes to my representative.
Just a question too about, again, looking at transferability and to your point, Stan, about this hyperpartisanship that we're in. The final 14 members of the Redistricting Commission were comprised of 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 4 independents.
Correct.
I know painfully all too well that is not representative of the party registration of the state. Do you think that that is something that can be replicated in deep blue states or deep red states, that intentionality of trying to balance the commission around what are very political decisions?
I think the answer is yes. Once you've made the judgment that you're going to try and have an independent commission, once you've made that judgment, then you will go out and you will find, and you go through this process of picking your individuals. The nature of the process picks people who are basically good government, nonpartisan types. They may be Republicans, they may be Democrats, but they basically want a system that works, that's responsive to the people. And so the partnership vanishes. In fact, it's interesting. They always thought we would fail at the beginning because we'd be partisan. And you got into the meetings, and there was a complete absence of partisanship. We just wanted to have a good result that met the public's needs.
And you see that because of the selection process.
Because of the selection process.
And and what was the vote? Like, you needed a majority to pass the maps, but you also needed a majority of each of the 3 sectors.
Right, exactly.
Is that it?
And that was important. That was the key factor in how this system worked. The Arizona system had an independent commission, but the Democrats picked 2, Republicans picked 2, and they picked the other one. So you ended up with the Democrats voting against Republicans, and so only the chair had a vote that mattered. Mm-hmm. In our case, we had 3 separate caucuses, and each caucus had to approve the maps, and then come back, because if you had 3, 3, and 3, that would give you 9. We had to have a supermajority. And if we didn't agree, that did not happen, but if we didn't agree, we would have to go back and re-argue it to where each group was satisfied that this map was the right map.
Process drew, kind of pushed the
We
result.
have been going through a process of deliberation with other states, as I mentioned. And so in states like Michigan, one of the biggest concerns is, well, if we have 3 buckets of commissioners and you have to have a certain number of votes from each one of those buckets, aren't you just going to lead to gridlock? Because if you can't get that requisite number of votes, then the whole thing gets stalemated. And what we think is that in the California process, because what we were doing was, A, not having the legislature directly choose those people, but B, also removing this kind of direct conflict of interest where people might feel ties to parties or special interests, but they were really coming from a space of being civically engaged, but just not owing loyalties to particular incumbents or parties. It changes the decision dynamic. right? And what we saw with the California process was that these 14 people who did not know each other at the beginning of the Survivor game, right? That's probably not a good analogy, but they didn't know each other, right? But by the end of it, they had, I mean, you went through a hazing process where you had to go through 100 hearings all around the state, and it really caused them to have a kind of respect and bonding with each other that allowed them to have a near unanimous decision on all of the maps, right? That's significant, and I think it signals a larger possibility for what we can do to make government functional as a whole.
We really formed a band of brothers.
Thank you very much. That was
Right.
very good. Very, very well done. Thank you so much. And now we have from our own state of Massachusetts, Quincy, the Quincy Police Narcan Program, Paul Keenan, the Chief of Police, and Patrick Glynn, the Lieutenant Detective.
Thank you and good afternoon.
Very excited to hear from you.
Thank you for allowing us to present today the Quincy Police Narcan Program. Along with me is Lieutenant Detective Patrick Glynn, who's also known as the Guru of Narcan. Going back to 2009, the city of Quincy saw a spike in overdose deaths and overdoses. As a result of that, we were losing our citizens at an alarming rate. The mayor at that time, Mayor Koch, formed a task force made up of citizens and community leaders. Out of that task force, after one of the meetings, the mayor contacted me and said, I have a woman here who was on the task force that has an interesting idea. He said, she's got a way to stop drug overdoses. I was a little skeptical at first, of course, but I said, of course I'll meet with the woman. At that point, I had met with the woman, but prior to that, I had read in the Boston Globe, which is our local paper, that the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts was looking to partner with a local city or town to form a Narcan disbursement program. So I met with the haulers, and they told me the people that I met with, the mother, they told me a very compelling story. They said that their son was a heroin addict. He had overdosed in the bathroom of their house. They immediately called 911. The 911 police, fire, and EMS responded immediately. They got to the house, but they were somewhat helpless to do anything with this overdose. They administered first aid. They transported the young man to the local medical center. Thankfully, the man survived, but she had said there's a better way. I thought about it, and she had mentioned the Narcan program that they were looking to form at the Department of Public Health. So I asked Lieutenant Glynn, who was our drug coordinator and our drug detective in charge of our drug unit, to look into it. We took a look at the program, and we partnered up with the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts. What we did is we trained all of our officers up to be able to administer, carry Narcan. Every one of our officers had the Narcan available to them, and the results were immediate. The first day that we deployed the Narcan, one officer in particular utilized the Narcan on 2 occasions and revived both of those people. They were able to get to the hospital and get into recovery. The program wasn't without challenges. We met some pushback and challenges from the union, but they finally consented and allowed us to implement this program. And I think the fact that 2 of our officers had lost children to overdose helped that path. To date, we have 700 reversals, I'm pleased to say, but we're not through. We determined early on we can't arrest our way out of this program. And I'm pleased to say, in small part, I think we changed some of the attitude in law enforcement from addiction being a crime to addiction to being a disease. And I think that opened the door to recovery. So I think that was a good thing as well. This program has been replicated nationally as well as locally and across the country, as well as internationally. To date, there are over 2,000 communities that have some iteration or some form of this program that they've implemented. It currently exists in 45 states. Unfortunately, that woman who came to me that day lost her son a couple of years later to a heroin overdose. And now I'd present Lieutenant Glynn.
Thank you. I'd like to say our program is built on 5 pillars: prevention, education, treatment, enforcement, and the R is for recovery and to reduce the deaths. And I'd also like to say that we speak for those that can't speak for themselves. Those are the individuals that need our assistance. The effectiveness, as the chief said, of the Quincy model has reached heights we've never imagined. As Sir Robert Peel said, the police are the public and the public are the police. And this initiative has resulted in a renewed relationship with our community. We're no longer looked at as the warriors. We're looked at as the guardians and the caretakers of the community. The warrior mentality was always synonymous with enforcement only. We changed the mindset of the officers. I like to say we reset the mindset of the public and the officers.
where we don't no longer have an addict out there. We have someone's family member. We have a son, a daughter, a father, a mother, and even recently grandparents that have overdosed. These are all individuals that we believe that once they enter into a program, they can re-enter into our community clean and sober. And there is a direct correlation, much like the broken windows theory, where if we have someone that has come back to our community clean and sober, we see they're a direct result of reduced quality of crime, and also we see them getting back to their family, being a productive member, the stigma being reduced from them being a drug addict, which, as I said, they're a family member. They no longer overdosed, they were poisoned. And those are the things that we take a look at. It's very, very difficult. If we don't collaborate, we're going to perish. There is absolutely no doubt about that. We're on a collision course as we see this opiate epidemic. And we'd like to say that we've created and succeeded in saving lives, statewide Good Samaritan amendments, statewide training, family visits for wraparound protection for the families also, because they are in a trauma dealing with this person with a substance use disorder, and they need some help. Removing that stigma in portable, adaptable programs. As Congressman Hal Rogers stated, a vision without funding is a hallucination, and there's no doubt about that. I would just like to say that within an arm's reach of a Quincy police officer, there is Narcan for life-saving techniques. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a really touching story. And I mean, just talking to you last night when you described how 2 of your own police officers had children who have died of an overdose, and one of your firefighters, it really breaks to come to home how difficult this tragedy is. And I'm really glad you were able to come to us today and tell us about it. David, did you want to say something?
So can you tell us more about what the police department does to help people get into treatment and the wraparound protection for families? Specifically, what is the department doing?
Absolutely. That's an easy question. I'm glad you asked that. I'll take that one. I'll leave the tough ones for the chief. That's a very simple process. The officer obviously responds in the 911 call. We administer, we reverse that. Off to the hospital they go. We also have a team that also responds directly to that overdose site in the event that anyone wants to offer information as to where the drugs came from or needs immediate assistance without pressuring individuals. The amendment to the Good Samaritan law was very crucial in getting those calls out there. It removed the power of arrest from the officer for small quantities of personal use, and also eliminated any liability for the individual calling for someone in an overdose state or themselves. Now we'll fast forward to the emergency department. The emergency department will treat them, also give them brochures and so forth, and keep them for 4 hours. After that, within 2 to 3 days, a Quincy police officer and someone from our outreach program, Man at Health Services, will respond to that house for twofold reasons. One, to contact the person that had the overdose and provide them with information and take them from that scene to a program if they want to at that time. Also, to treat the family in order to give them information and set them up with other programs like Learn to Cope, where they can go and discuss this with other family members and try and get through this trauma. And that has been very, very successful in this aspect of treating both the person with the substance disorder and the family. And we don't give up. We'll go back a second time. We serve everyone in the city. We don't pick and choose who we serve. So we're going to see these individuals again. They're our extended community family members. And the city becomes very small when someone overdoses and much smaller when someone is a fatal overdose.
Thank you.
Yes, Linda.
Can you, and then on the justice side, can you explain how the police officers are guided in terms of exercising discretion about whether they should carry through with an arrest, and what happens to the individuals if they're in fact sort of brought through the justice process?
Well, the Good Samaritan law kind of covers that. People aren't penalized for calling. What we were running into was we're finding people in the street, in parks and whatever that had overdosed with people that were capable of calling us and let us know. So the Good Samaritan law was implemented, and that took care of an awful lot of that. So part of that is we're as strong as we always were as far as enforcement. That's part of one of our pillars is enforcement. But instead of viewing the drug user as a criminal, we look at him as an addict, as a disease. Now we focus back on, we can put more focus and emphasis on drug dealers to get the drug dealers off of the street. We go as strong as we ever have as far as going after drug dealers and prosecuting them to the fullest extent of the law.
So are there no arrests of the users?
No, we don't arrest the users, and we don't arrest people. We give them amnesty if they've called. If they're with the people that overdosed, and they happen to be next to them when they overdose, and they were also using, we don't make those arrests. And the officers know that pretty well. They show a lot of compassion when it comes to that, but they also know the distinction between a drug dealer and a drug user.
Did you have to adopt sort of, decriminalization laws to do that, or how did you instruct your officers how to exercise their discretion?
That was one of the things. The officers still have discretion, obviously, but that was one of the key points, one of the two key points in the Good Samaritan, the amendment. And it's a very simple amendment to the Good Samaritan law, or even for a state that does not have one. It is the personal use. In the past days, in the past years, let's put it that way, the system has never worked of arresting someone, bring them in, arresting someone, bring them in. We're not going to arrest our way out of it, nor have we traded in our handcuffs for Narcan, as some individuals think. We want those traffickers. We understand that the individual is sick that's out on the street, needs help, needs treatment just like any other disease. If they were diabetic, we would give them a sugar product. If they had an anaphylactic reaction, we would use an EpiPen. They happen to have a poisoning, and the antidote for that currently now for an opiate overdose poisoning is naloxone, Narcan. So that is what we use. The power of arrest is no longer there. If someone does not want to go to the hospital, what we also were able to institute in Massachusetts was a protective custody law, which gives us the authority to bring this individual to the emergency department to be treated and held for 4 hours. That is a non-arrest situation. It's just a civil matter to get them there to make sure that they're going to make a conscious decision and that it's not overclouded by an overdose situation, because they have been deprived of oxygen. They came back from a near-death situation, and now they're there. And the crux of this entire program is the men and women of the police department that embraced it from the beginning to now, and I can't say enough for them.
One of the things that just wasn't clear until you just outlined it there, Lieutenant, is that connection between the use of the Narcan in that immediate emergency situation and the follow-on services. So in that, you mentioned there's a time 2 to 3 days after the overdose or after the person has returned from the hospital where someone comes back to the place of residence to offer entrance into a treatment program. Is that a police officer, or is that somebody?
There's 2 of our community police officers in plain clothes, along with an outreach worker and a clinician. And they are offered all the information that's possible. The reason we wait a little period of time in between the overdose state and the date of the house visit is we don't want that person inundated with brochures. EMS is giving them some, the emergency department is giving some, and they're getting information. They need a little bit of a cooling off period. We go to the house, and we've been very, very successful. I deemed it very successful when we were able to enter into the house and talk with the family and the individual. Now it's just an outstanding success when we see someone leaving there and going to get treatment, whether immediately or 1 or 2 days after that.
I'm curious about how that just developed. Was that all part of the original Quincy model, or was that something just learned over time, that waiting period and who actually needed to go to the house, and who comprised that group, and where those services were following on,
I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, I'm sorry.
We've always had the partnership with Man Health, our outreach group, and other organizations. And it just became a normal succession. We're out there, we arrive on scene about 95% of the time prior to other individuals. And we realized that we were that initial input, that first responder, so to speak. And we knew as we were going along with the program that we were going to tweak this along and make different adjustments. And then this became the perfect time to put it in place and to partner with Man Health. It's just been a fabulous program with them coming out, and we're going out a couple of days a week, unfortunately, but fortunately we have those resources to go out there and do that. And it's been a very happy collaboration with them and going out, and also the family. Years ago, we would never get the results or the change in the perception from the general public that the police are really out there to help them. Not being paranoid by any reason, but it's just one of those things that we do represent law enforcement, but now people see the other side of it. A softer but still a strong side, caring side, but still a very effective side.
Thanks.
When we were talking last night, you said that a number of the people that you pick up or help are not from Quincy itself. They're from other jurisdictions. what do you do with those other jurisdictions? Do you call them and say, hey, Amherst, you're sending us a lot of your people?
I'm glad you said Amherst. But what we actually do is we're now tracking, we always track by zip code. We have a number of zip codes within our city. So we could actually see what part of the city we could focus our needs on and do a needs assessment. But now we're focusing on the zip code of the individual that actually overdoses, where they're coming from outside the city. And what we do is we're very close-knit with other coalitions and so forth. We inform them that we had an overdose resulting from someone from their community. But it also helps us tremendously in being able to refocus our needs within the community itself, whether it was someone that was just a transient moving through the city, a worker, or someone visiting. We still have that exposure to the drugs. We'll treat them, we'll reverse them, and a number of times, no matter what it takes. But we're able to track that now. In the next town over, we'll be able to specifically tailor-make their needs assessment to the individuals that are overdosing. So it's a very fluid situation, which was really nice to track that way now.
Thank you very much. Yes.
You mentioned that 2,000 other communities have adopted the use of Narcan. How many of them have adopted the rest of your strategies that, you know, focus on servicing the families and getting the people into treatment and so on?
Well, I kind of go back to the rudimentary crawl, walk, run. They're starting naloxone, Narcan programs, and they're starting to see the need and the benefit of that, so they're actually doing it coinciding. There's a large number. They're changing every day. North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition is outstanding with statistics on that aspect, and they help us out an awful lot with that. And they're bringing in statistics nationwide. And we're seeing not only when people start a Narcan program, they're starting the home visits also to see the value. So that is constantly changing. I could not give you a number right here and be satisfied with that number, but it is growing every day.
Sadly, just in closing, while we were here, we received text messages about things that are going on in our city. We actually just had an overdose death about a half an hour, 45 minutes ago. So it's real time.
I'm very, very sorry. I want to thank you for your leadership and for your vision for what you've done, and thank you so much, and I'm very sorry for your death. All the best to you.
Thank you.
We're now going to hear from Michigan and their public community spaces. Nate Scramlin and Catherine Sarnacki. How is that?
Close.
Okay, Catherine, you tell us how to do it.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, thank you for this opportunity. In 2014, Michigan confronted a dilemma by states and municipal governments across the country: declining public revenues and budgetary concerns. The questions we faced were these. 1, how can we empower communities to support and invest in developing community spaces during difficult economic times? And 2, how can we support communities so they can be an attractive place to live, work, and play? Our solution: public spaces, community places. PSCP has been a catalyst in raising funds for community projects, from bike trails and boardwalks to community centers and gardens, to playgrounds and pavilions, to public art and farmers markets. We believe public spaces, community places is a 21st century approach that draws on the power of social media efficiencies while fostering civic pride and engagement that is immediate, effective, and provides a sense of community accomplishment.
And I'm proud to say that Michigan is the first state government partnership to use crowdfunding. We found that by shifting the grant approval process to the local residents, the community engagement is increased and sustained. The appeal is simple. There's no government bureaucracy, there's no tedious forms, there's no frustrating red tape. Participation is immediate, accessible, and measurable. We believe that PSCP fundamentally changes the approach to community development. PSCP takes 48 hours for approval. Grant funds are then delivered within 5 days of the verification that all of the requirements have been met. So in contrast, a typical community development block grant process lasts maybe 6 months to a year. This is straightforward, simple, efficient, and effective. So PSCP begins with the community identifying and then requesting funds for a project. To date, more than 60 communities across the state have participated in the program. Since 2014, the MEDC has invested $3.6 million in grant funds, while communities have raised an additional $4.3 million through our civic crowdfunding model. The average project goal is $33,000, and projects almost always raise more than their goal. On average, 117 people participate in the fundraising campaign. And in total, more than 5 million square feet of public space has been activated and reactivated in the state of Michigan.
From contributing to the resurgence of Detroit to improving the lifestyle of small towns in the Upper Peninsula, our program helps build places that matter, which in turn helps the state of Michigan attract investment, build tax revenue, and retain talent. PSCP is vital in communities where local and municipal funding is limited. With tight budgets, placemaking projects are often low priorities. By supporting projects through crowdfunding, citizens are empowered to help shape their community's landscape and future. These additional dollars ensure a community's ability to continue to support placemaking while focusing general fund dollars on public services and infrastructure. PSCP allows us to track public space reactivated and investment. We've realized that for every $1 in grant dollars, we leverage more than 7 of other private and public dollars.
This program is a proven model for other states. So 2 states, Indiana and Massachusetts, are using the MEDC patronicity model and are reporting success. Carmen Lathig from the Indiana's Housing and Community Development Authority said the program, quote, generates a high level of public involvement and is widely successful in assisting local communities in becoming better places to work, live, and play. Mary Jones, CEO of Mass Development, said MEDC and patronicity's approach, quote, brings a fresh, nimble perspective to how to invest in locally led projects, end quote. So while PSCP offers a transferable model to other states and communities, it's also a model to nonprofits and foundations.
At the John F. Kennedy School of Government, we are reminded that President Kennedy challenged us to get involved in public service. In the context of today's presentation, President Kennedy's challenge can be understood as do what you can to make your community and the world a better place, and in turn, your community will make you a better person. Before you today, we ask that you keep in mind that public spaces, community places, is inspired by the ideal of service, responsiveness, and transparency, an efficient, effective community development approach, an approach that can be sustained and replicated by local, regional, and state governments. As measured by the many examples of success, there is no doubt public spaces, community places is making a dramatic and positive difference in Michigan communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda.
I have so many questions.
All right.
I'll start with the tough one, which again is about the issues of opening up access to underserved communities. And so I guess I'm curious of what you can tell us about these projects, and what are the special challenges around communities that don't have as many resources, perhaps don't have the CBOs to advance the projects for them, and what have you done or tried to do to address that as an issue from design, or has it been an issue?
Sure, that's a great question. We were actually talking about this earlier. Interestingly enough, some of the wealthiest communities in Michigan, Ann Arbor, Grosse Pointe, Birmingham, have not used this program at all. We think that's because they can just go out and fund a project. People contribute, they do it on their own. Where we've seen the majority of projects come are cities that are distressed. And it's not municipal governments coming forth, but it's those small community groups, the neighborhood organizations, such as communities in Flint, neighborhoods in Detroit. We've seen Lansing. All of those projects have come from neighborhood or nonprofits and not the municipal government. And so we really feel that by putting this opportunity before them, those locals have that opportunity, because Flint can't go out and do a public park with their municipal funding. I'm sure you all have heard of the situation in Flint. Detroit also has other budgetary concerns. So we actually think that the program itself just lends itself to more of those struggling communities and neighborhood associations.
And why is it that you have to go through government or a nonprofit to advance a project? Like citizens can't sort of get their own group together and do it?
Well, we wanted some sort of legitimacy to an entity. It's a little bit of a protection for us as a state agency to make sure that we're not just giving John Smith money and there's no checks and balances to make sure what he does. As Nate mentioned, we turn around the money within 5 days. And so we want to make sure that there's some sort of entity receiving those dollars to make sure the project actually gets accomplished.
Right, and we'll often find where a group will come together, a citizen-led group, that will recommend, hey, go out and work with the local
Partner.
nonprofit out there to bring your project in.
We also, I do want to mention, we tried, and when we first started, we allowed for-profit businesses because we said, what if there's a for-profit business that wants to do something that is around the public space? It didn't really work out as we hoped. So we went back to just the municipal and the nonprofit model.
So just a quick thing on that. It has to be a 501c3 that
Yes.
Yep, or a local municipality, downtown development authority, something like that.
David?
So one of the things that's so appealing about this to me is it involves probably thousands of citizens in volunteering and funding and making things happen in their community. Do you have any numbers, or if not, guesses about, say, when you wrote this, there'd been 94 projects. What's the average number of people involved in funding, volunteering, somehow being active in each of those projects?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, on average, we've found that 117 people support each project, right?
So-
I think, actually, we have a small town called Portland. Portland did a mill project where they, are hosting their farmers market now, and other community events. But we estimate that a quarter of their population actually donated to this effort. They had change jars all over the place, and they've just, really, the amount of community support that gets around these things is insane. And you mentioned the Lansing Reach Arts Center. This is a youth arts center where they came to us for their first project, and we supported them. They were successful, so they expanded their arts center. And the second time, we've kind of took a hard stance and said, well, we've already kind of activated that public space for you. Well, they went and used the tool anyways without the government match, and they were able to raise another $30,000 on their own. So we've grown their support base.
So how many completed projects are you up to now?
112 as of today.
So it's 112.
Could change tomorrow.
Times 117 people, you've got something.
Oh yeah, we're
12
in
or
tens of
13,000
thousands.
people in Michigan have been involved.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, and I think on the REACH example, what they found the first campaign they did with us, more than half had never contributed to that organization
At all.
before. And so just by virtue of doing that campaign and that project, they now have a donor and friend pool that is grown substantially.
It's sustainable.
Right.
Yes, Pete.
So a couple of years ago, the grand prize winner of this gathering was the participatory budgeting project. And in some ways, it feels like this is participatory budgeting in that a certain budget has been set to match. But instead of having the public choose the project, you're asking them to both choose it and co-fund it. I'm curious about the role that patronicity plays in this as well. You'd mentioned that one of the challenges you had was just setting up the legal framework by which this was
Right.
possible. Talk a little bit about, again, to that replicability question, the legal relationship with the crowdfunding platform and how what you learned either could be transferred or just given things that are unique in Michigan, every state is going to have to go through their own process.
Well, we actually, we have patronicity with us today, but when we were talking with our site visit coordinator, literally Massachusetts and Indiana picked it up and moved it. Their funding stream is a little bit different where they get their match dollars from, but in terms of allowing the same process, it's virtually identical. So we think that other states could use this. We've kicked around the idea of using our CDBG dollars in this fashion as match.
Well, and I think it's also scalable, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a state government that does it. You think about any particular city that may have a community foundation that says, okay, I've got $200,000 that we want to put towards the development and reactivation of public space. So they put that out there. They set their own parameters of, say, $10,000 is the top they will fund. Well, then you've got 20 projects now that could be utilized just in that community. I mean, you can do it at all levels of government, in my opinion.
Do you have any sense of what % of these projects would happen without the public money?
I mean, that's a good question.
I mean, I think that it's interesting looking at the size of the project. So for example, our first project was a Detroit alleyway. And when I talked about the leverage ratio, we look at the total project. So the total project was $200,000. They had received a donation from a company called Shinola, and so the nonprofit went out and said, okay, if we raise 50 from our neighbors, the MEDC will match it. And so that project essentially leveraged other funding sources, and they could have gone out to fundraise. I think it just makes it a little bit easier in terms of filling that gap. We're the last money in. But in smaller projects where we do, the smallest project is $5,000. We've seen it's all or nothing. So, a small project like a trailhead in a very small rural community, they have to raise the $5,000 entirely, or else it wouldn't happen at all, because they need our money. So it really depends, I guess, on the size and scope of the project.
I think it would be a little naive to say none of them would happen,
right,
if it wasn't for us. But I think, this tool really, it's all about, we want to make these communities vibrant now, right? We don't want to wait. We're in Michigan. We want to attract talent. We want people to come to our state. So we're implementing this tool to make it happen faster.
And so,
Linda?
I hope this is not an unfair question. How do you know that the results have made communities more vibrant? Like, is there any evaluation to go and look at those 112 and see whether they're in fact being used, whether they've transformed a place, a block, whether citizens are engaging in those places in different ways?
Yeah, I think that we actually, when we took Barbara around and we went to the Portland Red Mill, looking at that project in terms of how the community has rallied around this space. And Portland's a community of around 4,000 people. They are still active. They are making sure that nobody does any graffiti on the building. They have community events. I mean, the level of continued participation is really, really fascinating. And we do make sure, one other thing that's really important to us, it is immediate. We don't want to fund a project and have it sit there. We want to be able to see in 2 weeks they have shovels in the ground, or in a month the project is done. And so working with Patronicity and our field staff at MEDC, we make sure that those projects are actually turning over. And we do case studies on every single one to show the before and afters.
So you go back and to look at utilization?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you very much. It was great to hear about all the participation and the new projects and the revitalization. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And now, Pathway to College and Careers from Minnesota, Julie Nigan and Michelle Pefferon.
Close. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present here this afternoon with this prestigious group. Talking about our program, we've spent a lot of time over the last several months talking about this program, so we're happy to do it at this level. So more than 400 immigrants, refugees, and undereducated adults have entered Pathways to College and Careers, our Bridges to Healthcare program. It's an individualized, systematic program. Pathways to Prosperity is a unique partnership between Hawthorne Adult Basic Education System, Rochester Community and Technical College, our Workforce Center system, and our employer partner, Mayo Clinic. It provides an opportunity for clear pathways to self-sufficiency for participants who are currently being served by public assistance in some form or another. And it helps give them access to education to provide them the opportunity to be self-sufficient. So this afternoon, we've decided to share with you 4 stories to really highlight how the program works and the clients that we're serving.
Had Pathways existed, Amber's story and the stories of many other adult learners would have had vastly different endings. At 16, Amber left South Carolina and arrived at Hawthorne with her 2-year-old son. She had not attended school since she was 12. She and her son entered our family literacy program where he began preschool, and she attended parenting and high school diploma classes. At times during her 3 years with us, Amber was homeless and lived with a Hawthorne teacher and her family. When she completed her high school diploma, Amber entered Rochester Community and Technical College. Her Hawthorne teacher accompanied her to orientation and registration to ease Amber's transition to college. We all breathed a sigh of relief and satisfaction. Prematurely. Within the first 2 weeks of the semester, Amber missed a couple of days because her car wouldn't start. She had no idea how to access the support she needed and dropped out of college. We didn't find out about her barriers and about the unfortunate results until months later. Too late to help. This was the impetus for Hawthorne to expand its mindset and services and to partner with RCTC to provide successful transitions to college and build a system of academic, social, and financial supports for adult learners.
Jawar, an immigrant from Pakistan, came to Hawthorne after leaving an arranged marriage to an American. She was determined to support herself and continue her education. At Hawthorne, she prepared for a healthcare career, became employed as a certified nursing assistant, continued on in Hawthorne in remedial coursework, which is about 70% of the students that come to RCTC need some level of remedial coursework. So she did her remedial coursework at Hawthorne rather than at the college. She successfully completed freshman comp, and that's our sort of our barrier to many students being successful in college, where that provides an opportunity for team teaching, where Hawthorne faculty teach with our faculty. They develop some co-curricular to make that transition successful. Jawar was nominated and awarded a Beat the Odds $2,500 scholarship to pursue the program at the college.
Abdi Kadir's story demonstrates the advocacy of our navigators and the dynamic partnership with Mayo Clinic. Abdi was a phlebotomist in Somalia before moving to the U.S. To support himself and his mother, he worked in customer service. Although employed, Abdi's goal was to rejoin the healthcare field and to work at Mayo Clinic. Abdi Kadir enrolled in prep classes for phlebotomy at Hawthorne. When he applied to Mayo School of Health Sciences phlebotomy program in January, Abdi was not offered an interview. Because of his international transcripts had not been received, his application was incomplete. The Bridges to Healthcare navigators advocated for Abdi. They worked with him to document his requests for transcripts and to include reference letters with his application. When he reapplied, his application was complete. During his interview with Mayo, something unprecedented occurred. Due to the credibility of the Hawthorne program, the admissions committee offered him a seat in the phlebotomy training program on the spot. He also received a full Mayo scholarship, as all Hawthorne Bridges to Healthcare participants do. When his Mayo teacher saw his phlebotomy skills, Abdi was offered the option to end his training and begin a paid position immediately. Although it was a tempting offer, he felt he could better serve Mayo patients if he completed the entire phlebotomy program. He graduates from Mayo May 22nd.
Yay.
And finally, Susan's story demonstrates the drive and the dignity of our adult learners. Though Susan was born and raised in the U.S., she was in other ways an immigrant. With German as her first language, she spoke limited English and had only 8 years of education. She came from a culture and a lifestyle out of mainstream America. Susan left her Amish community and family at age 18 to pursue her passion of an education. She came to Hawthorne and within 2 years earned her GED and took the Certified Nursing Assistant program. She became employed, but that wasn't enough for Susan. She wanted more. She returned back to Hawthorne for the remedial preparation so that she could attend RCTC and pursue her career in nursing. She sat across when she first decided to leave her family, working in an office building across from Mayo, and said to herself, one day I'm going to work at Mayo. And we expect, as she's done with her preparation this summer, that she will be offered an employment at Mayo.
Just a quick conclusion. On Thursday, we received the news that one of our Bridges to Healthcare participants was graduating from RCTC with honors in nursing. In 2011, Valerie, a refugee from Cameroon, entered Hawthorne's English language classes, progressing to the CNA, to college prep, and on to RCTC to become our first registered nurse.
Thank you so much. Those were very inspiring stories, and it's always good to hear. Thank you so much. You did go over your time, so we don't get as many moments to ask you questions, but they were great stories, so thank you, and it was really good to hear from you. Skip, did you have a question?
I did. I'd be curious to hear how important it is to have an anchor employer involved. We heard a lot about Mayo, and obviously they're an iconic institution, and you have a very, very low unemployment rate, so you have kind of a unique job environment there. How important is it, as we think about replication, to have that anchor employer so deeply engaged?
Well, certainly it's been a huge advantage for us, but you have to understand that Rochester is a very small city, the smallest city represented here with 110,000 people. but Mayo employs 34,000 people in its Rochester office, or its Rochester campus. So to have them as an anchor, they are the anchor for the entire community. Without their support, nothing really innovative happens in Rochester, frankly. That being said, healthcare, well, there's healthcare everywhere in this country. And healthcare employers need primary care healthcare workers. We need them. We baby boomers need them, and they need them. So, yes, anchors can be strong, but we started out with them out Mayo as an anchor. They were just a partner. In the last couple of years, they have become a financial anchor for us by contributing and guaranteeing us over about $500,000 of funding.
And if I can just add, with the unemployment rate that we have, employers are being forced to come up with different ways of developing their own employees and recruiting talent. And so when we look at the replication or the ability to transfer the model that we've developed, again, healthcare is everywhere. And when some of the major players in that industry see what Mayo Clinic is doing and what they're achieving in developing a diverse workforce that is filling those highly demanded positions, I suspect they will be motivated to look at those best practices.
Yes, Linda.
The outcomes that you produced in terms of retention and completion were just remarkable. I don't know that I've ever seen anything in the employment field like it. And it seems like the figuring out how to get that remedial class done before entry into the program was, or as part of the program, shifting that earlier in the non-tuition bearing stage. And I don't think I really understand it, and so if you could just explain it in a way that would also help us to understand, is that something that could be replicated broadly?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm happy to answer it.
Yay.
Yes, we have flipped what is normally done. Normally in this country, students enter community colleges, and as with RCTC, 70% of them need at least one remedial course. And it is typical also, becoming more typical for adult basic education programs to go to the colleges, and the students enter college, and adult basic ed is there to support them while they're in remedial classes. We decided to do the opposite, to incentivize our students to stay in adult basic ed, to teach those classes the way we teach them, to teach them more intensively, to teach them with a goal of them mastering the material, not failing people. Sometimes they do fail, but they're not done. They're off, they don't have it on their record, and we just say, okay, next time, how is it going to be different? How can we help you succeed?
This is part of the public schools.
Right, we're part of the public schools. We're part of the adult ed division.
So let me just, to get this straight, you're the public schools.
Well, I'd like to say I'm the whole public schools, but no, just the adult ed division.
You're the adult ed, so if the public schools were teaching the students, we wouldn't have this issue, right, in the first place. If they were, so that's one issue.
That's one of them, but we also have to recognize that students enter the system.
Okay, you don't want to go there, I can tell.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
So let's not go there. So let's just go to, you have adult students, and they have a choice. They can go to the public schools to get their GED, right? That's what you're telling me? Or they can go to their community college.
They have to have a GED before they can come to the community college.
And you're saying what you changed was when they got their GED, you did a better job of preparing them for community college.
We kept them. We incentivized them to stay with us rather than going to college where they were eligible to go. But we learned, and they have now it's sifted through the entire community, that you're better off staying at Hawthorne and getting ready before you go to college.
And can you, okay, so the question is, so what you're saying is that when the GED certificate as currently developed isn't really a good certificate because it allows people to go to community college when they're not really eligible, when they shouldn't go. There should be something more thank you, more demanding if they want to go to community college, because it's a way, they drop out of the community college and they feel badly about themselves, and it goes on their record. So basically what you're saying is your innovation is making sure that the GED that they get is a much higher level.
It's taking them beyond the GED. Actually, the GED, the new GED, is much more rigorous.
Right.
And we're seeing higher levels. That being said, we have people graduating from high schools all over this country without the skills to succeed in college, or 70%
Yes, I
of
remember I went there, but you didn't want to go there.
Yeah, I know, but they're going there. They're going to college.
I meant, I said,
Yeah, so it's like a GED plus, and so the standard, and so instead of doing the college readiness work in their first semester of college, which frustrates them and they drop out, you add it on top of the GED before they get there, and anyone who goes in with this, that's where you have like the 93% success rate or
Right,
something crazy
right.
like that. Yeah.
You're absolutely correct.
New York City, are you doing this?
I will tell you, just to add to that, the refugee population that we're serving are coming, and they have diplomas from their home country, and we recognize those, but they don't have the English skills, and then they don't have the reading and writing skills that they need to be successful in college. They come to us, and we'll offer the classes.
And if they go to the GED, is the point is that that's free?
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, that was a little hard for me to understand that, all of what you were saying. There was so much information. So this has been much clearer to me, and I thank you for that.
Good.
So most of the communities represented in this room don't have a Mayo, right? 40,000 employees and 110,000 residents, so it's a company town. Is it going to work without a Mayo? Is it going to work in Flint, Michigan, or Quincy, Massachusetts?
If you are a community that has health care, provides health, and has a healthcare system, of course, Mayo's in 6 states. And so that does help, that Mayo is all located in 6 different states now. But if you're a community that has a healthcare system, you probably need certified nursing assistants, you need phlebotomists, you need hemodialysis techs. What you need, and you also have people who are living at or below the poverty level, underemployed, undereducated, immigrant, refugee, whatever. You bring them together and provide a system for success for them and success for your community.
But you're also customizing with the employer the community college piece as well. To what degree is Mayo involved in the community college?
So they certainly participated in our curriculum development process. And I see the time is up, but they developed, and they allowed us our faculty job shadow, to make sure that when we were teaching them on the job or teaching them in the classroom, we were applying it to how they were going to experience it when they were on the job, to make, again, that transition more smooth. But I think to your point with Mayo Clinic, Mayo Clinic has so believed in this program that they have gotten other departments who are hiring. So we started with one department that was doing hiring. Other departments have recognized, wow, you figured out how to recruit diverse, qualified folks. How do we get in this? So we've sort of grown into, vertically integrated, but I will tell you also that Mayo has gone with us on our presentations to convince other employers in the healthcare industry to figure out how to do this, and that they will help consult and work with their HR departments to solve that.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you. That was
Thank you so
really
much.
interesting and really important. Actually, we had a long discussion at our lunch about how, if we had the resources, we would try to take your program and replicate it across the country. Or we thought the federal government should do it. It went over really well. Thank you very much. Okay, now, speaking of the federal government, here we go. Federal Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Initiative. Jen Gustick. Okay, Jen.
Jen Gustetic. I know, lots of consonants.
Okay, I think you should say it slowly so that it's not just me who learns how to say it. Could you say it again?
Jen Gustetic and Jennifer Couch.
Jennifer Couch, I think we can figure out. Okay, thank you.
Just like sofa.
Yeah.
All right.
So our project, we'll refer to it here as the CCS, seeks to mainstream citizen science and crowdsourcing in the government broadly.
I think you should speak louder and more slowly so everybody can hear.
Okay.
Particularly
Normally,
me.
I'm not accused of speaking too quietly, so I will move closer to the mic. Our project, we'll refer to it here as the CCS, aims to mainstream citizen science and crowdsourcing broadly within the government. How many of you used Waze or Google Maps to navigate around traffic on your way here today, or check the Minutecast to make sure it wasn't going to rain on you, or look something up in Wikipedia? Then you've done crowdsourcing, and you've benefited from crowdsourcing. And if you took it a step further and contributed your list to the Audubon bird count, or worked with your community to monitor water quality, or played a science game like Folded or iWire, then you've done citizen science. These terms, citizen science and crowdsourcing, they get defined in a lot of different ways, but at their core, they're powerful approaches to getting things done. Collecting and analyzing data, adding insights to plans, applying innovation and creativity to problem solving. Now imagine us using those tools and those approaches in the government to do our work. Partnering directly with the public to catalog the nation's archives, manage natural resources, promote education, carry out scientific research, rapidly assess changes after a natural disaster. I'm from the NIH, where I'm working to reduce the burden of disease and promote health, and Jen here's from NASA, developing technologies for future human and science missions. But we're not really here alone. We're joined in spirit by over 300 of our colleagues from across 60 different federal agencies, working both within Washington and across the country to carry out our diverse missions. We're partnering with the public using citizen science and crowdsourcing to do our complicated and diverse missions. And doing this wasn't easy. There are technical challenges and there's well-meaning regulations developed in a different era. And it's not easy to work across federal agencies. It was hard for us even to find each other, to find resources and expertise. So we formed a small group and we grew this into a community of practice, a grassroots effort, adaptable and with networked governance. And we needed resources, methods, case studies, metrics. So we shared those at first around a table, and then we built them into online resources, a catalog, case studies, tools. We shared these with each other and then with our colleagues in our different agencies, and then ultimately with the public. And this community-driven effort became citizenscience.gov.
But while online resources are great, culture change and business transformation doesn't happen thanks to technology or toolkits alone. It happens because people learn new ways of working and trust that it will be worth their time and effort to implement that way. The peer learning network established by the CCS is the secret sauce that will spread learning and implementation of these approaches not only within the federal government, but at universities, local governments, and beyond. These approaches represent an entirely new way of working in the federal government. To punctuate how important this community of practice has been to this work, I want to share a quote from Dr. Holdren, the former director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Quote, "The CCS has provided seemingly limitless energy, vision, and excellence in advocating for citizen science and crowdsourcing across government. Many of the federal policy products you see today would not have been possible without this group." End quote. I also want to assert how unique this group is. As the former Assistant Director for Open Innovation at the White House, I've worked with half a dozen communities of practice across the federal government, and none compare to the passion of this group that they have shown for the last 5 years. The CCS is not a typical federal organization or government organization. They have no budget, no permanent staff, no traditional management structure. It is a more fluid and dynamic organization that strives to tap the energy and interest of people to contribute. They go well beyond the call of a typical community of practice. And the performance speaks for itself. In September 2015, we knew of about 114 federal citizen science and crowdsourcing projects that existed. Today, less than 2 years later, there are over 400 projects listed on citizenscience.gov. These projects include everything from gathering real-time natural hazard information to measuring mobile broadband performance across America. And this is just the beginning. Also, our membership has been growing at a steady rate since 2012. Approximately 60 new members a year were joining up until the launch of citizenscience.gov. After the launch of citizenscience.gov, within the first 7 months, an additional 75 members joined, more than doubling our recruitment rate, bringing us to the about 350 members that we have now. The expansion possibilities are huge within the federal government, at the state, local, and tribal government levels, and at a growing number of partner organizations, NGOs, academia, and more. Scaling this work will educate, involve, and inspire hundreds of thousands, I said hundreds of thousands, of people in advancing scientific research and addressing societal needs while drawing on previously underutilized resources. Now, to put that into scale, after analyzing 338 citizen science biodiversity projects, so this is specific to biodiversity citizen science, university researchers at the University of Washington estimated that the in-kind contributions of those 1 to 2 million citizen scientists, 1 to 2 million citizen scientists that worked on those projects, was an economic value of approximately $2.5 billion per year. $2.5 billion per year in economic value for those projects. This finalist nomination is a shining example of how new ways of working in government is unleashing a new era of public participation in government, creating the potential to engage hundreds of thousands of people in thousands of high-impact projects. This is the definition of impact and scale for a new way of working in government and is transforming the cultural fabric of government itself. The use of citizen science and crowdsourcing has a great potential for scaling, but so does the learning and action network that this community has used to get there. It can and should be scaled to other innovation approaches.
Thank you. Linda.
The 330 that you just mentioned, were those among the 400 of the ones on the CS?
So I gave you two numbers. So the 330
Yeah.
is the number of members in our community of practice right now. The 400 plus are the projects, specific projects that are listed on citizenscience.gov.
The final outcome data that you just listed to us.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought you said
Different.
330
Yep.
projects with a certain number of users and leveraging the billions
Yeah,
of
good
dollars.
catch. So those, some of those, a lot of those were not federal government projects, right? So they were looking specifically to the biodiversity sphere of all the projects, citizen science projects that had happened in biodiversity.
So you were using that stat to help us appreciate the potential.
The potential.
Do you have any numbers yet like that? I'm sure it's incredibly hard to figure out how to calculate it, but can you give us some sense of the impact of the citizen involvement in the projects that you guys have gotten off the ground through your initiative?
So typically, at this point, and this is similar to how we talk about outcomes and kind of other innovation tool spaces right now, it tends to be on a project-by-project basis because they can all be so different. There are three general outcomes that we see from citizen science projects, citizen science and crowdsourcing projects. One would be accelerating scientific research. So you'll see science outcomes that you might not have seen otherwise, new discoveries that are enabled because of the extra time, work, and resources that citizens are able to involve in the scientific discovery process. You also see outcomes in addressing societal needs, things that are totally not science related, like measuring broadband access, right? Understanding where there actually is, what the broadband speeds are that are available around the country through a crowdsourcing project. And the third area is enhancing STEM literacy and education outcomes, where you see a lot of projects that are focused in on, like the Coco Ross project, which is a rain and precipitation measurement project that has 20,000 participants from around the globe, where in many instances there are classrooms of students taking those measurements every day. And the students are not only learning about the rain cycle, but their data is being used to actually inform weather models at NOAA. And so they know that what they're doing, their learning, is actually being reincorporated and used by the federal government. And that makes that learning much more meaningful than just an experiment that is kind of sitting alone in a silo that's not incorporated into a broader scientific effort.
What's the process for outreach on a project? How did you get those 20,000 classrooms engaged?
So the process for each project is a little bit different. It depends on the goals and exactly what we're trying to accomplish. So some of these projects come to us from the community who has an interest in, maybe understanding water quality or soil contamination or something like that, and they need to work with an academic researcher who, can work with them to do the measurements and do the science. Sometimes we see them going out broadly, like via a game interface where millions of people might play an online game and have that kind of an outreach. We work directly with organizations like SciStarter to market out some of these projects broadly on their platform, and then one can find them on citizenscience.gov.
And many of those actual techniques are what are incorporated into our toolkit that we built. So on citizenscience.gov, there is a toolkit that includes case studies and step-by-step instructions. One of the sub-steps is around community engagement and outreach, right? So some of the sharing of the nuances of different project types are that learning is captured within the toolkit that's available for the broader community to leverage.
Yes, Pete.
So this is another one of those applications that I'm wondering what's most innovative, the relationships that needed to be built to create some sort of technological solution or the platform itself. And both of those speak to the ability to replicate this. It seemed like that Holdren memo in 2015 was in some ways a turning point, at least in the way that you described the project. And so could you speak a little bit to, at least at the federal government level, how these relationships can continue to be developed, and then how unique is this citizen science platform?
So it's not so much the platform per se, it is this community, this ecosystem that we've created.
Right.
And what can be replicated here, in addition to the hundreds of projects that are already out there using citizen science and crowdsourcing, supported by our different agencies, the communities of practice can be replicated. So this federal community of practice that we have has been replicated now in numerous federal agencies, and we can imagine that being replicated across other government spaces. But
can you just give one example of what that might look like?
Sure. So the community of practice for the federal government is the 300 people in the 60 agencies.
Right.
Within my own organization, the National Institutes of Health, we have a community of practice for citizen science that is something like 40 people across our 27 different institutes. There are communities of practice in NOAA and EPA and various other agencies. Some of those evolved in parallel with the federal community of practice, and some of them were spawned because of the federal community of practice.
And another note there to add is one of the partner organizations that we've added to the group to help kind of institutionalize this and take it away a bit from the volunteer labor, right? That all of these folks that are in the federal citizen science community practice are doing this other duties as assigned. They've built all of this with no budget and with their passion and with the ability to be super scrappy and put things together and get advocacy, create advocacy from above because of their passion below. One of the things that we've done in the last couple years is create a partnership with the General Services Administration, the GSA, to help create some more permanent infrastructure around the support of citizenscience.gov with a couple full-time employees, some procurement budget, in order to really support not only this community, but they manage 17 other communities of practice for prizes, for open data, for now AI. They've got 17 other communities of practice that are trying to do, honestly, the same thing that the citizen science community has done, and we did it quicker, faster, and more effectively than any other community of practice in the federal government has been able to do to date. And so they would like to learn across those communities of practice for other tools how to replicate many of the techniques that we used in this learning and action network. We've all been on a million working groups and a million communities of practice, some of which are active and useful and some of which that aren't. This has been remarkably active and useful, this method of convening and method of working across agencies.
Thank you.
What impact do you think the new administration in Washington will have on your community of practice?
So it's still to be determined whether or not this will be a policy priority of the administration, this particular tool, but we do know that we have very strong and evidenced bipartisan support by the passage of the America Competes Act legislation in January that authorized the use of these tools, citizen science and crowdsourcing, across the entire federal government. They actually learned from in order to authorize that legislation, they learned from some reports that early came out of this community that identified the legal barriers to doing these types of projects within the government. The Paperwork Reduction Act, accepting volunteer labor, a variety of different issues that were addressed in this new legislation to be able to take down barriers and enable more of these projects from the federal government.
Right. But, I mean, what I read, I mean, I'm really glad that you're here from NIH and they've increased your budget by $2 billion. But on the other hand, what I read is that they're reducing the amount of information that is on a number of sites, including the EPA and including NOAA and including other scientific sites. Maybe not NASA, because I think there's support for NASA. So, I mean, for us, it would be a little ironic to think that this is getting much support from the federal government.
So I think what's also really useful to think about in this space, because it's an approach, it's a tool that can be applied to a number of domains. So the FCC used it for measuring broadband. NASA uses it not just for discovering new protoplanetary disks around potential stars, but many other things. It's not just science. There's NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration, uses it to digitize records. So there's so many different ways to apply the approach and the tool to a number of different domains. And that's part of the power of this approach as well.
Yeah, this isn't a program with a budget. This is an
Excuse
approach
me?
that we use. It's not a program with a budget. It's an approach that we use to carry
Right.
out our work, and which is regardless of budget.
Quick question, just on, one of the bottlenecks, as you called them, that you had to get over was the Paperwork Reduction Act and what it allowed you to do in engaging the public. Was your ability to navigate that, is that a kind of a once and for all for similar types of communities in practice, or is every other community in practice that wants to engage the public on these kinds of crowdsourcing initiatives going to have to go through this same thing?
That's a really good question, and this is a unique part of the citizen science and crowdsourcing tool, that there does tend to be a lot of data collection in the types of work that happens with citizen science and crowdsourcing, which is unique from like a prize where they might be using data in order to create a product or a tool, but they're not necessarily collecting it. And collections is where the Paperwork Reduction Act is triggered. We've seen some agencies, like the Environmental Protection Agency, did a generic ICR. So what does that acronym mean? An information collection request. That's the notorious process in the government that can take 9 months to get a survey approved from the OMB before you can go ask 10 people, more than 10 people, the same question, which when you're talking about surveying or collecting data, that would seem to be a huge barrier, right? EPA actually went through the process of creating a generic ICR, which took them the 9-month process to do, but now every new project that comes out of EPA only has to go through a 2-week fast track process to do that. So that at this point is not a barrier that was like completely taken down by the law, the new authorization, because there is a role for the Paperwork Reduction Act to make sure we're not going out and collecting data that isn't relevant or is too burdensome or isn't tied to the research objectives. There's a reason for doing that deep analysis on the data you're collecting, but we can do it quicker, and that's how agencies are figuring out how to get the generic processes in place to be able to do it quicker.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you so much. I wish you all the best of luck. It really is exciting to get the crowdsourcing and learn science better and get people involved. So all the best to you. This has been really an exciting afternoon to hear from each of these fabulous programs. And as we heard from what was going on in Michigan, I think New York City has a lot to learn. And I think we can each learn from all of the different programs. I must say, I was just inspired, and I think our whole group was, by each of you. What you've accomplished and what you want to accomplish is really just terrific. It will be difficult for us to make our decisions, but we were very, very thrilled to hear what you each have to say. I think now we're going to have a reception, so you can come up and lobby us, which is which I'm happy to be lobbied. I believe in lobbying. Somebody was against lobbyists, I think the California, but that hasn't reached Massachusetts yet, the home of gerrymandering. And I just say, one of the really cool things about this effort is that I often meet people who know members of my family. And last night, I want to tell you that Julie Nigel told me about how in 1960, her father, who had 6 kids, and he was an assurance adjuster, said, "Stay up, because Robert Kennedy is coming to your house." And he was campaigning in La Crosse, Wisconsin, during the Wisconsin primary. And sure enough, he showed up late at night, but trying to get every Catholic vote he could. And because of those Catholics in Wisconsin, John Kennedy won. Thank you to your father and to your mother. And on that note, yay for politics and yay for those who believe in public service. Thank you very much.